Nick took a while to come to terms with what he had just seen. This was a Specter, but the containment unit that was supposed to suppress it hadn't done anything to it. Nick had believed he was safe. He wasn't. There were Specters that broke out of their containment units, but Nick wasn't sure he had ever seen one simply allowed to leave. "My authority outranks the Emperor's authority," the Pure One said. "I can overrule any of your decisions if I choose to." Nick furrowed his brows. Why? Naturally, his question wasn't how, but why. Why would the Empire allow this Specter to outrank the Emperor? "I am the last resort," the Pure One said. "If the new Emperor doesn't value humanity, it is my duty to get rid of them. In the Empire, while I could also outrank the Emperor, his advisors could outrank me, while he could outrank the advisors." Balance of power, Nick thought. If the Emperor goes out of control and does something the advisors don't agree with, the Pure One can revoke the status of an Emperor. However, the advisors can also stop the Pure One. Like this, the Emperor can't become a dictator. However, Nick thought as he looked at the Pure One, the fact that they trusted a Specter with this feels unreal. "You will understand," the Pure One said. "I can imagine that you believe this to be a risky choice by the Empire, but when you truly understand the creation of Specters, you will realize there was never any risk. Specters are just like humans. They are just very complex machines. A human's thoughts and decisions are created by electronic waves inside their brains. A Specter's thoughts and decisions are created by Zephyx in their Specter core. A human's electronic waves move in a predictable pattern, shaped by their biology and experiences. If you know both things, you can predict what a human would do years in advance. Free will is an illusion. Even your doubts are pre-programmed. Having doubts is part of your process as a biological machine." The Pure One gestured for Nick to follow him out of the containment unit, and Nick did. Specters are not any different. In fact, they are much simpler. Specters are not natural creations. They did not evolve like other animals or humans. All Specters are artificial. "I am simply a Specter that was created by the Empire." The two of them entered one of the rooms with several machines. "The natural Specters you know are programmed to cause suffering to humanity. I do not believe I have to tell you why." Nick nodded. "Meanwhile, I have a different programming." The Pure One looked at Nick. "I am programmed to be human. I have feelings like rage, doubt, fear, and love." The Pure One chuckled bitterly. "It's just that feeling these things is difficult nowadays. I've been alone in an enclosed room for tens of thousands of years. I've mostly spent my time meditating, but tens of thousands of years is a long time. I'm supposed to feel things, but after such a long time, I'm not sure if I can anymore." Tens of thousands of years in isolation, Nick thought. I can barely imagine. I'm not sure I would be sane after such a long time. Since the containment unit didn't have any star energy or pure energy, he also couldn't leave. He was stuck inside until someone activated the containment unit from the outside. The Pure One could tell what Nick was thinking just by looking at him. "Do not pity me," the Pure One said. "I chose this. I volunteered. As a Specter, I do not age. Machines die and energy vanishes, but as long as there is profix in the atmosphere, I won't die." The Pure One opened a panel in one of the machines. "Can you refill the pure and star energy in this machine?" he asked. Nick nodded and walked over. He held his two rings to the machine, and its energy storage rapidly refilled. The Pure One gave Nick several commands. The Pure One didn't have a seed, and he couldn't command the machines without one. Because of that, Nick had to do everything. Nick knew what this machine was. It was a biological analyzer. It could scan biological matter and break it down into data. However, its database was empty. "All knowledge in all the machines has been deleted," the Pure One said. "The enemy deletes human knowledge and electronic knowledge when a new era dawns. We are not entirely sure how they sense it, but if they had sensed any information was contained here, they would have found deep core base already. These machines operate on instinct, which is not easy to understand since that doesn't make sense at first glance. However, you said you already learned about the Empire's engineering." Nick nodded, showing that he understood. The part about instinctual machines was extremely weird. It dealt heavily with the concepts of space, time, and reality. Nick didn't have the tools to create instinctual machines yet, since they were so hard to make. Instinctual machines were difficult to create, and they were not better in any way than normal machines. Their only benefit was that their function was not bound by time and space. An operator would send a command to an instinctual machine. The command would be transformed into many tiny particles, which would vanish a moment later. After that, new particles would appear, and they would transmit the result back to the operator. In a way, it was like having a computer in a separate dimension, but that was oversimplifying it tremendously. Luckily, since the instinctual machines operated outside of Earth's reality, the information they processed couldn't be sensed. Sadly, while it was possible to process information this way, it was impossible to store it. Instinctual machines worked on instinct. They did something, but they couldn't remember it. "We are going to refill the database," the Pure One said, "and we are going to use your disguise ability." Chapter 860. How? Nick asked. "I can't imitate a human perfectly since I don't know everything about human biology." "But I do," the Pure One answered. "We are going to start with a finger and I will tell you everything I know about it. With the new knowledge, you are going to create a new finger. We will go through all possible permutations until you know how to create any kind of finger and how they work perfectly. Then we get to the next part." "All right," Nick answered. That made a lot of sense, and it would also help with Nick's disguise ability. Since he already knew how the machine worked, Nick put his finger in front of a lens and ordered the machine to analyze. An instant later, the image of a finger appeared in front of Nick. "I don't have a seed," the Pure One said. "Right, give me a moment," Nick said. Nick conjured several parts and put them together. Some minutes later, a small machine sat beside Nick. He activated it, and the image sent to his seed was redirected to the small machine. Finally, the machine projected the image into the air as a 3D projection. Nick explained to the Pure One how to change and manipulate the image. After just some seconds, the Pure One perfectly understood how to operate the machine, and he started looking at different parts. "The distal phalanx is the tip of your finger, and the Pure One transmitted, going into a deep explanation of all the details. Nick knew most of what he said, since these were just the basics, but he listened anyway. Since they were talking via voice transmission, the time wasted on the basics was minuscule anyway. After covering the basics, the Pure One talked about how the distal phalanx was shaped by genetics, nutrition, and how the owner lived. He talked about common deformations, even amongst extractors. Next, he talked about the blood vessels of the distal phalanx and where exactly they led. Those could also change shape based on different ways of living. It sounded simple, but the intricate details of this were already far beyond what Nick knew about anatomy. When the Pure One went into detail about genetics, it became difficult for Nick to keep up despite his high intelligence. The reason was that he was only looking at a part of the big picture, making it difficult to see the connections between the small part and the whole. "Biological machines are not like regular machines," the Pure One said, referring to humans as biological machines. "They are filled with errors and illogical connections. There are countless ways to improve a human's body, but that is not the body humans have inherited. You must first understand the illogical nature of why human bodies are made like this." Nick nodded. This was another reason this was not as easy to understand as engineering. Engineering was filled with logic, and if something didn't fit quite well, one could just fix it. However, the human body had countless inefficiencies and unnecessary parts. Some parts had been useful when humans had still been fish. Of course, these parts had lost all meaning since. It became even worse when unnecessary parts somehow contributed to necessary parts, making them necessary again. The appendix was a good example. It acted as a refuge for gut bacteria in case of a horrible infection, allowing them to recover quickly, but it could also cause immense issues. Removing it sounded like a safe bet. However, the choice was not that easy. Sure, one got rid of a huge danger, but in the grand picture of the body, this removal also showed some detrimental signs. Some unnecessary things became necessary, and by the end of it, the biological machine that was a human was formed. The adaptability of a human's body was terrifying. It could even use Zephyx to become much stronger. Yet if one looked closely, the way it worked was filled with horrible and illogical connections. It reminded Nick of the big flexinator the technician had created. It had simply grown with time, and it needed an overhaul. There were many ways to simplify the human body, but one could only attempt that after understanding the entire picture that this idiotic design created. After a couple of months, The Pure One had explained skin, muscle, and bone. Just by knowing that, Nick could create a disguise that would fool even the Pure One. In essence, to create such a disguise, Nick needed to tell a story with his body. There had to be tiny malformations that told everyone how he wielded his weapons. There had to be tiny crevices in his skin that showed which expressions Nick used most. His bone density had to be slightly different between different parts of the same bone, due to the movements he made during his life. In the past, Nick had just disguised himself as a human. A blank slate. Sure, that was enough to fool almost everyone, but the Sun or the Pure One would see through that disguise. Luckily, both of them already knew he was a Specter, and he didn't need to fool them into believing he was human. After a couple of months, the Pure One started explaining the organs in more detail. 2 years later, the Pure One was also done with that. Finally, it was time for the most complex part of human anatomy. The nervous system, including the brain. The brain underwent the most change during one's life. The brain continuously changed whenever anyone did or learned something. There were so many changes that it bordered on impossible to predict them. In fact, even for Nick, it was impossible. He could make many predictions, but he needed a much stronger mind to understand why a human did what it did. Luckily, Nick's status as a Specter helped him in this regard. In the future, he could create abilities that would do a lot of the calculations for him, similar to his mind-reading ability. After another 5 years, they were done with the nervous system as well. But there was one last thing the Pure One needed to teach Nick. Now, we are going to talk about the alterations, the Zephyx Synchronizer, and how we can change the human body. Chapter 861. It took a long while for Nick to create a Zephyx Synchronizer that fit the image of a Zephyx Synchronizer. When he finally managed to make one, Nick could truly see how different it was from the human body. It was perfect, and that was exactly why it was not perfect. It was like Nick's former disguise. It was artificial. It did not belong. Even the part of the genome that dictated the Zephyx Synchronizer was perfectly efficient. It barely took up any information in the genome, but still ended up producing a terrifyingly complex and capable organ. These things wouldn't be noticed by anyone, but after learning basically everything there was to know about anatomy, it was impossible not to notice. The Zephyx Synchronizer did not grow with time like the other parts of the body. It was like it just appeared one day in its perfect glory. The Zephyx Synchronizer was the only thing in the human body that couldn't be made more efficient. Well, as long as one's goal was to suppress humanity. As the Pure One unveiled the details of the genome and the Zephyx Synchronizer, Nick saw the hidden dangers. The biggest one was its susceptibility to one particular wavelength. If the Zephyx Synchronizer was exposed to this wavelength for 5 seconds, it would collapse, and all its stored Zephyx would heat up uncontrollably. This would essentially turn the owner of the Zephyx Synchronizer into a pile of ash. Nick remembered all the piles of ash he had found in different ruins. That is how the sun ends an era, he thought. It emits this wavelength throughout the planet, and anyone with more Zephyx than a late newbie will be turned to ash. Late newbies will be crippled, and will most likely succumb to their injuries. Mid-newbies will also be crippled, but they will survive. Early newbies will definitely survive, but their Zephyx Synchronizer won't be able to recover. They will most likely have a scar on their neck for the remainder of their lives. Initial newbies will feel a bit of pain, but they will fully recover. Normal people won't even notice. Then Nick remembered the piles of ash in the ruins of the Ancient Ones. They didn't have Zephyx Synchronizers, but still turned to ash. The sun probably did that by just emitting a regular high-frequency wave across the planet. Killing a normal human with high-frequency waves is not difficult for the sun. The Empire knew about these waves, right? Nick asked. That means they found a counter. The Pure One nodded. Naturally, I don't know much about the final battle, but I know the waves wouldn't have hurt our warriors. Is there anything you can tell me about the final battle? Any predictions? Nick asked. I know that destroying the sun was a done deal, the Pure One said. There was no uncertainty in that. As soon as the plan launched, the sun would be destroyed. It's possible, Nick thought. The Enlightened Ones might have actually succeeded in dealing with the sun, but they didn't know a lot about the aliens themselves. I probably know more about the aliens than they did. It's definitely possible the Enlightened Ones destroyed the sun, but following that, the aliens sent their local squad of guards to kill them one by one. Most likely, the guards then killed every hero and stronger. The aliens rebuilt the sun, and the sun reset the era. At that moment, Nick remembered the pile of ash above the Jolly Cannibal. As far as I know, that person was also supposed to join the final battle, but it never happened. It's also possible the aliens realized what was about to come before the enlightened ones were prepared to strike. The Pure One continued talking about the Zephyx Synchronizer and how it changed the entire body, making it reliant on Prefix and Zephyx. This is not supposed to be like this, Nick thought. By now, he could see that one of his guesses had been spot on. A small amount of star energy was not an issue for humans, but being doused in star energy would cause several parts of their biology to break down. That was all due to the reliance on Prefix and Zephyx that the Zephyx Synchronizer created. Without a Zephyx Synchronizer, humans could swim in a sea of star energy and not feel a thing. It might even show some slight positive effects. The humans of today rely on Zephyx to become more powerful than any human that came before them, but that reliance is a massive weakness. However, in a way, this is no different from just requiring a lot of food. A big animal relies on a steady supply of food to keep operating, and if that food is taken away, it will starve quickly. If humans want to become powerful, they need energy. It doesn't matter what kind, but they need at least one very potent form of it. Due to the Zephyx Synchronizer's straightforward nature, it didn't take long for the Pure One to explain it to the last detail. But then the next big topic arrived. Potential changes. Theoretical methods to alter a human's genome to be reliant on star energy or pure energy. I can tell you how to create the humans who lived in the Empire, but I cannot tell you exactly why the star energy and pure energy do what they do. You need the energy knowledge repository for that, the Pure One explained. Nick nodded and listened to the Pure One. The Pure One explained how to create humans who could store Zephyx in their bodies, but didn't use it as a power source. These kinds of humans could store and absorb Zephyx, but they also needed star energy to transform the Zephyx into pure energy. These humans had been the warriors of the Empire. However, there had also been humans with Zephyx synchronizers. The reason for their continued existence was to produce Zephyx. This new kind of human could produce Zephyx, but the efficiency was several times lower. Additionally, this new kind of human required a lot of pure Zephyx and star energy to grow, and that Zephyx had to come from somewhere. Sadly, Nick knew he couldn't use this method, since the aliens would be prepared for exactly this kind of human. He needed to create his own method, one that was very different. Finally, there was only one last topic remaining. Creating a Specter. If Nick could do that, he could solve the issue of the consumption. Chapter 862. The creation of a Specter was surprisingly easy. One just needed to manipulate Prefix in a special manner to create one. Of course, this special manner was incredibly difficult to find, but when the Pure One explained it, it sounded simple. Without a doubt, countless centuries of research had been needed to reverse engineer Specters, but explained via voice transmission, it only took a couple of minutes. After one knew how to create a Specter, one only needed to give it a personality. Nick knew almost everything about the brain and how humans worked. Because of that, creating a personality wasn't difficult. After learning all of that, Nick looked at the Pure One in a new light. There truly is no danger in letting him roam around, Nick thought. He has been perfectly engineered to stay loyal to humanity. His entire existence revolves around helping humanity because that is what he wants and desires. In a way, this felt cruel. It was essentially taking free will from a living being. But free will is an illusion anyway, Nick thought. Everything a person did was preordained by their past. Even the spiteful actions one would take to prove to oneself that one had free will had already been dictated by the past. The person's past had been like this, which was why that person would cut their arm at this point, just to prove to themselves that they had agency over their life. Everything was mathematics. Emotions, feelings, logic. All the neurological pathways had been created, and they would always fire in a certain way. Humans have agency over their lives. They can do what they want with their lives. They can choose what they will do. But their choices and desires have already been decided. My past has made me desire to free humanity, so I choose to dedicate my all to humanity. I do have a choice in that matter. I could decide not to help humanity. But if I actually choose that, it means this choice has always been in my future. If someone knew everything about me and knew everything that is going to happen around me, They would know if I would betray my beliefs, and if I actually did that, they could point out the time I would make that decision to a second. In a way, free will was a paradox. One could do what they wanted, but one's wants were already set in stone. One had free will, but one also didn't have true free will. Time moved forward, and as long as time didn't move backward, the future was already set in stone. The future dictated the present. Hypothetically, if humanity freed themselves of the aliens, the being responsible for freeing them would go through tremendous efforts to achieve that. The causality of time was reversed. And yet it also wasn't. The time stream had been set in stone. If Nick decided to drop everything and kill himself, there would never have been a future where humanity was free to begin with. He was always meant to abandon his desires. And if he succeeded, he was always meant to succeed. These thoughts were not easy to swallow. But I can do what I want, Nick thought. No matter what I do, I can decide not to go through with it. I have agency, I have free will. I just don't have the power to change the future. The future takes my free will into account, and there is no uncertainty about it. After about 9 years, the Pure One finished explaining everything about biology to Nick. It was done. Nick had learned everything there was to learn from 2 of the 4 knowledge repositories. I can now deal with the issue of consumption, but if I want to recreate humanity, I need the energy knowledge repository. I can copy the enlightened ones, but that's not good enough. That's it, the Pure One said. That's everything. You now know as much about biology as me. Nick nodded, thank you. I must remain here, the Pure One said. If you fail, humanity needs another shot. I don't know what contingencies you have planned, but the contingencies of the Empire need to remain intact for humanity's future. I understand, Nick said. The Pure One went over to the biological analyzer and ordered all recordings deleted again. There is one last thing I have for you, the Pure One said after deleting the recordings and deactivating the machine. The Pure One opened his mouth and put his arm deep inside it. His arm reached into his stomach, and he pulled it back out. Finally, he held his arm out to Nick, offering him something. There was nothing there. However, this action made Nick take a deep breath. Take it, the Pure One said. You should know how to use it. Nick carefully moved his arm forward and grabbed nothing. He didn't feel anything. It was like there was just air in his hand. Then Nick stretched his other arm to his hand, and his arm vanished. It is empty right now. You are free to use it however you see fit, the Pure One said. I have 3 of those in total, and all the machines in Deep Core Base should be enough for 3 eras. Naturally, the Pure One had given Nick a sanctuary. With this sanctuary, Nick could transport whatever he wanted, as long as it wasn't alive. Do not, under any circumstances, put it somewhere casually, the Pure One warned. You will never find it again. I know, Nick answered with a nod. Only take what you need, the Pure One said. I am going to go back into my room. If you manage to free humanity, you can come and get me out. Otherwise, I would ask you to remove the star energy and pure energy of the containment unit. Nick looked at the Pure One. Even after waiting in isolation for tens of thousands of years, he was willing to go back. Nick didn't protest. The Pure One was like Nick, Aegis, and the people in the underground city. They were all willing to sacrifice their lives for humanity. Their own happiness came second. I will free humanity, Nick said as the Pure One entered the containment unit. You have a better shot at it than the Empire, the Pure One answered. I genuinely wish for you to succeed. Nick nodded. The door closed between them, and Nick retrieved the star energy and pure energy from the containment unit. Now the Pure One was stuck inside again. There were only 4 paths in his future. 1, Nick would free him again, meaning he succeeded. 2, the aliens would find Deep Core Base, and he would be killed. 3, another being would free him, meaning Nick had failed. 4, he would be stuck here until Earth was no more. This was the Pure One's future, and he had chosen it willingly. Chapter 863. Nick left Deep Core Base and went back to the underground city. Within the last 9 years, the underground city had changed yet again. While 9 years was just a short trip for him, it was a long time for normal people. The number of experts had increased drastically. One needed a shell to become an expert, and with perfect usage of Zephyx, it took about 10 years to make one. By now, the underground city already had over 2,000 experts. In any other city, this would be crazy. Cities generally had between 30 and 200 experts at any given moment. When Nick had still lived in Crimson City, there had been about 100 experts. This city had over 2,000. They had 20 times the number of experts as Crimson City. Such a force would be terrifying for the Specters in the surroundings. And we're going to increase that to over 2,000 specialists, Nick thought. After returning, he contacted Samar and Arya. He met the two of them in Samar's office, in the middle of the underground city. Samar had the title of Chancellor, the highest authority in the city, while Arya had the title of Commander, the highest authority in the military. While Samar was more than brilliant, she didn't have a lot of combat experience. Arya did. I have acquired the biology knowledge of the Enlightened Ones, and I am going to add it to the archive. It will take about 10 years to transcribe everything, Nick said. That's quite a lot faster than last time, Arya said. Nick nodded. I can create a biological implant and interpreter that lets me tell the machine everything via voice transmission. As Nick looked at the two of them, he couldn't help noting several parts of their bodies. Bodies told a story, and he could now see Arya's and Samar's stories. Arya trained hard and tried her best to be strong for everyone. Her expression was stalwart, and there were several signs of regular training visible on her body. Samar, on the other hand, seemed like she was fighting against the tide. Nick could see the stress accumulating on her body. She had a lot on her mind, but she knew this was her duty and responsibility. As the chancellor of an isolated society, she had to make many difficult choices. All the authority was in her hands, and if anyone inside the city spoke about forbidden knowledge, everyone would die. It was her job to stop that from happening. She needed to keep her people happy enough that they didn't lose control, while also allocating resources according to contributions. She knew everyone was stuck here with no way out, and such a life was not easy for many. Her mind was assaulted by constant worry. But that was what made her so good at her job. She never took things lightly. I also have a solution for the consumption, Nick said. The two of them had expected something like that and waited for him to continue. We are still going to use the consumption. It's superior to what the Enlightened Ones used to become experts, Nick said. However, he added, seeing their skeptical expressions, we are going to use artificial specters. Artificial specters? Samar asked, furrowing her brows. Was that even possible? The researchers had entertained the idea, but it was just amusing. They didn't even know where to start. Finding out how to create an artificial specter is difficult, but actually creating it is not, Nick explained. We can already create all the materials for the machine, since all of them have to be treated with Zephyx anyway. The Specters will grow by consuming pure Zephyx, and they have no limit to their speed of growth. If we feed them enough Zephyx, they will become elders within a day. They also won't have any survival instinct, which means anyone can consume a peak elder without any danger. The Specter cores will integrate almost willingly. When the two of them heard that, they had to take deep breaths. This essentially got rid of all the weaknesses of the consumption and kept only its strengths. Peak elders. Nick had been the only person who ever managed to consume a peak elder. His rate of improvement had shot through the roof after consuming it. Specialists who consumed a peak elder might become heroes after only 30 years. That was unimaginably fast. How much Zephyx do we need? Samar asked. A lot, Nick said. Creating an artificial specter will consume about 7 kilograms of Zephyx. Their growth, on the other hand, will consume about 1.2 tons. Samar took a deep breath. 1.2 tons for a specialist. Crimson City's yearly tribute was only between 10 and 20 tons. Of course, due to the protectors and heroes in the underground city, they produced a lot more Zephyx than Crimson City. But they also needed Zephyx for research and pure energy creation. If we take our time, we can make it work, Arya said. We don't have to turn every expert into a specialist in a year. This is a long-term project. As long as we keep turning more experts into specialists as veterans turn into experts, we'll get rid of the backlog eventually. Samar nodded. It was a heavy hit on the finances, but they could take it. I am going to put the knowledge about the artificial specters into the archive first, Nick said. There isn't a lot. Within a month, the researchers can start focusing on creating the machine. It's simpler than you think, and I don't think it will take more than a year for them to make it work. After I'm done with that, I will deal with any resources you need. Arya smiled bitterly at Nick, and he could see she already had something in mind. Well, Arya said, we have a couple of protectors now, and we are in dire need of Zephyx. One fallen is not enough anymore. Nick nodded. I'll get right on it after I'm done transmitting the knowledge about artificial specters. Chapter 864. A network of routes traveled through the underground. The network was almost 2 kilometers wide, stretching some routes forward while pulling others behind it. In the middle of the route network was a black skull made of roots and decayed flesh. The skull was long and had 2 horns coming out of its back. This was the Bringer of Decay. The Bringer of Decay used to be Sloth's most powerful servant, but after Sloth got killed, it found itself beneath a new master. Pestilence. It was a mid-fallen, and its duty was to bring decay to the cities. Over the past years, the trio of destruction had become less subtle. Instead of trying to take over cities in secret, they were now openly attacking them. Within the last 10 years, over 20 cities had been destroyed. However, Aegis had also killed or captured over 50 demons and 9 fallen. The Bringer of Decay was waiting for its master's orders. Soon it would bring death and decay over another city. It moved slowly forward with no set direction in mind. It was just waiting. Its connection with Pestilence was ever present. Bang! Suddenly, a metallic figure appeared in front of it. The figure was a round orb about 5 meters wide, with 8 long metallic legs coming out of it. In the middle of the orb was a red crystal, and for just a moment, the Bringer of Decay could see its own reflection in it. I am under attack, the Bringer of Decay transmitted to Pestilence. Yet the next moment, it felt its transmission reflected right back, its own voice appearing in its head. For just an instant, a distortion around it lit up before vanishing. It couldn't contact Pestilence. Its transmission had been intercepted. It knew it had to attack. Its roots rapidly. Bang! Its skull detached from the root network. It hadn't seen the attack at all. The legs of the metallic figure spun, and 8 lasers shot out. The lasers skillfully cut off parts of the skull within milliseconds. When the Specter core was unveiled, the orb shot toward it. The crystal moved aside, opening a hole. The figure's body engulfed the Specter core, and the crystal moved back into place. Inside the figure, waves of star energy destroyed any part of the Specter core that tried to attack the machine. An instant later, all the prefix was sucked out from inside, and the Specter core had no option but to go dormant. Meanwhile, the network of roots was rapidly turning to black dust. Suppression complete, the prime drone transmitted. Nick appeared right in front of it. He had been the one who beheaded the Bringer of Decay. Immediately travel to Checkpoint Alpha, Nick ordered. Affirmative, the prime drone answered. It turned into a long, thick metallic rod and shot into the distance. As it traveled, it began to vanish. Its body was no longer visible, and the ground showed no sign of its movement. Nick turned to Mist and also retreated. The connection to Pestilence might have been severed, but there was a high chance Pestilence had noticed the disconnection. Luckily, Pestilence was over 10,000 kilometers away right now. Although that couldn't really be attributed to luck. Nick had chosen this moment precisely because of Pestilence's absence. Some seconds later, Pestilence appeared where the Bringer of Decay had just been. Yet there was no one here. The only thing Pestilence could see was the remainder of the roots turning back into prefix. Pestilence knew its servant had been suppressed, but it didn't know how Aegis had accomplished that. Suppressing a mid-fallen was not easy. Even more, this was the first time Aegis had managed to capture a fallen without it warning its master. Had Aegis become that strong? Had they managed to suppress the fallen so quickly that it didn't even have time to formulate a single thought? That seemed almost unbelievable. If the Champion of Light had unleashed a surprise attack and instantly killed the fallen with his light, this would be possible. However, killing something was different from suppressing something. A Specter of this size couldn't just be enveloped by a Specter cage due to its size. Aegis would first need to isolate its Specter core, and that would give the Bringer of Decay enough time to send a transmission. But there had never been one. Instead, Pestilence's connection with its servant had simply vanished. One moment it had been there, and the next it was gone. It was instantaneous. Pestilence knew its Specter had been suppressed, not killed. Otherwise, there would be traces of dispersed Zephyx. Pestilence didn't think anyone in Aegis was this strong. That only left one possibility. Aegis had developed new technology that could isolate Specters from other Specters without enveloping them in a Specter cage. It had to be some kind of force field. This was troublesome. It needed to talk to Death about this. The possibility that Julian Winter had captured the bringer of decay didn't even enter Pestilence's mind. First, Julian Winter was only a fallen himself. Second, why would he even capture Specters? Like any Specter, Julian fed on humans. Maybe he had a reason to kill certain Specters, but he definitely didn't have a reason to contain them. It had to have been Aegis. The loss of the bringer of decay was a heavy one for Pestilence. This had been its second strongest servant. After some seconds, Pestilence left again. Meanwhile, Nick met up with the Prime drone near the underground city. He retrieved the Specter core and suppressed it with his own Zephyx suppressors. Finally, he put it into a containment unit inside the city and sent the Prime drone back to Rising Star Base. That's dealt with. Chapter 865. Hello, a smiling man said, arriving in front of Aegis headquarters. Welcome, please identify yourself, one of the guards asked politely. Sure thing, the man said, activating his barrier. Welcome back, Researcher Manjurian, one of the guards said. Manjurian nodded and walked into Aegis headquarters. He casually walked down to the bottom level and went to the Research and Development Department. With his credentials, he easily opened the door to the secure area and entered. Hey, how did the mission go? One of the protectors in the department asked. Regular, Manjurian answered, nothing special. The protector nodded, I'll wait for your report. Yep, Manjurian said, walking past him casually. Manjurian watched the researchers at work. There were some extremely advanced machines down here. He walked to one that nobody was working on and pulled a small metallic device from his pocket. He placed the device on the machine and moved to the next one. What are you doing? One of the researchers asked after Manjurian placed another device down. Testing something. This will be great if it works as expected, Manjurian said with a smile. When he approached another device, the researcher working on it looked at him with furrowed brows. I'd ask you not to include my machine in whatever experiment you're running, the researcher said. It's going to be fine, Manjurian said. He placed a couple more devices on machines before stopping in the middle of the lab. Several researchers looked at him with raised brows. Now I just have to activate it, he said, typing away on his barrier. He accessed the database and added a new registry, then typed in a string of complicated symbols. Some seconds later, he hit publish. Nothing happened. Hey, can you access the database? One of the researchers asked, looking at his barrier with furrowed brows. The other researcher tried to open it, but his barrier said there was an error connecting to the database. Manjurian looked happily at his own barrier. And now for the final touch, he said, pressing a button. Boom, boom, boom. All the devices he'd placed on the machines exploded at once. This was not just a normal explosion, but one that scrambled the Zephyx. All the materials were altered beyond recognition, deleting the knowledge inside the machines while destroying them. The lab fell into chaos as everyone scrambled away from the blasts. Luckily, the explosions weren't strong enough to breach their barriers. Nobody died. Bang! A shield burst through the door. She was a small woman with red hair. Her aura was soft, and she looked at the lab in shock. Over half of their machines had been destroyed. All the researchers knew what had happened. The devices Manjurian planted had exploded. This was deliberate sabotage. The new shield, the Tinkerer, glared at Manjurian, who turned to look at her with a smile. Greetings, Tinkerer, Manjurian said. I am envoy of my master, Julian Winter, and I have come to deliver a message and to be suppressed. The researcher's eyes shot open with shock. Julian Winter. He was back. He hadn't shown himself in over 10 years. Everyone looked at Manjurian with shock, sensing his aura. He felt completely human. But this was a Specter, right? Would you please escort me to the Champion of Light? Manjurian asked. I have a message for him from Julian Winter. The Tinkerer narrowed her eyes at him. What did you do to the real Manjurian? She asked. I didn't do anything, the fake Manjurian answered. I was given this identity by my master. The Tinkerer gritted her teeth. She remembered the bright soul that was Manjurian. He had given his everything to Aegis. And now he was dead. The Tinkerer resisted the urge to kill the Specter on the spot. The next moment, the Specter slowly pulled a device from its chest and the room filled with Specter Zephyx. When they felt its density, they widened their eyes. Initial fallen. This is a present, the Specter said with a smile, placing it on the ground. My master created this device, and he believes it will help you quite a bit. It uses star energy to mask Specter Zephyx as human Zephyx. My master believes you will enjoy analyzing this device. Manjurian's appearance changed. He turned into a six-armed human with three masks on his face, a laughing mask on his left, a crying mask on his right, and a peacefully smiling mask in the middle. You may suppress me now, the Specter said. The Tinkerer narrowed her eyes. Bang! She reached the Specter instantly and blasted its body apart, leaving only the Specter core. Then she put Zephyx suppressors around it. Finally, she snorted. You destroyed quite a bit of our progress, but all our advances are gathered in the database. We just need to recreate the machines. About that, one of the researchers said. We haven't been able to access the database. The Tinkerer's eyes widened, and she typed away on her barrier. She used her administrative access and moved the database into secure mode. Yet even in secure mode, she couldn't access any of its entries. She ran out of the research and development department and into the physical location of the database. It was a humongous room filled with complicated computers. She retrieved several devices and started scanning the physical Zephyx inside the machine. The Zephyx was completely scrambled. It was still there, but everything was in a complete mess. It was like all the numbers had been gathered and randomly redistributed. Everything was still there, but all in the wrong place. He encrypted our database, the Tinkerer realized in horror. Chapter 866. What did it do? The champion asked the Tinkerer, who stood in front of him with the suppressed Specter core. The Tinkerer took a deep breath, terror on her face. It encrypted our database, she said in horror. The champion furrowed his brows. So, just decrypt it. The Tinkerer laughed nervously. That's not that easy. Why not? The champion asked. We don't know how it was encrypted. We need a number to decrypt it, and we don't know that number, she explained. Then just try all the numbers, the champion said. Champion, the number might be thousands or millions of digits long. We would need to try every number from 1 to Googleplex. Even with our most advanced machines, that might take trillions of years. The champion's eyes widened in shock. At that point, creating a new database and researching everything from scratch would be faster. What's the impact on Aegis? He asked. The Tinkerer took a deep breath. All data is inaccessible, we can't see anything. The automatic containment units can't be accessed. We can't verify or assign identities. We can't open doors. We can't operate most of our machines. We can't contact cities. We can't contact the strongholds. I had to open the doors by hand. The champion looked at the Tinkerer in horror. He used his barrier to command his coffee machine to make some coffee. The coffee machine answered that it couldn't verify the champion's identity. His own coffee machine was refusing to make coffee. Aegis had been crippled. The individual barriers could still communicate with each other, but anything requiring access to the database no longer worked. The good news is, the Tinkerer continued, our containment units have a failsafe. As long as they still have Zephyx, they'll keep suppressing the Specters. That means our contained force Specters will only start breaking out within the next couple of days. We still have time to. What? The champion shouted. Our force Specters might break out. They won't, the Tinkerer quickly answered. We just have to refill their Zephyx manually. After that, we just need to change their design a bit to allow us to gain access. We don't have access to our Specters, the champion shouted, standing up from his throne. Pretty sure I've said that, the Tinkerer thought. Yes, we don't have access to our Specters at the moment, she said. Fix this immediately. You're the technician's replacement. It's your job to deal with these things, the champion shouted. The Tinkerer started to sweat. We have to know how it was encrypted. If we know that, we can decrypt it, she said. I need to ask the Specter. The champion furrowed his brows as he looked at the suppressed Specter core, then waved his hand. The Tinkerer nodded and put the Zephyx suppressors away. The Specter recovered and looked around. This does not look like a containment unit, it mused. Tell us how you encrypted the database, the Tinkerer asked. I encrypted the database, the Specter asked. Oh, that's what all those lines were about. I didn't know, sorry. The champion looked at the Specter in disgust. He knew exactly that it wasn't sorry. Tell us what you typed in, the Tinkerer asked. Of course, the Specter answered. Naturally, its life was in Aegis' hands, and it would help them so they wouldn't kill it. The Specter recited the complicated lines it had put into the database. "Fuck," the Tinkerer shouted, kicking the ground. The champion glanced at her. That was an unusual outburst. Naturally, he didn't understand anything the Specter had just recited. "What did it say?" the champion asked. The Tinkerer was breathing heavily. "The encryption is based on our database's contents. The order it sent gathered random letters from millions of random entries, converted them into numbers, and multiplied them together. I know what parts were read out and how they're multiplied, but without access to the database, I don't know the values of those parts. In essence, I need access to the database to access the database." Even worse, there was no check for the sum. It put a lock on the database and then destroyed the key. Nobody knows what number is needed to decrypt it. Not me, not Julian, not this Specter. Nobody. The champion put his head in his hands, while the Tinkerer glared at the Specter. Why did Julian do this? What does he want?" she shouted. "I don't know," the Specter said. "I only have a message to deliver, and then I no longer serve Julian Winter." The champion pulled his head from his hands and looked at the Specter. Maybe that message held some information they needed. "Speak," the champion said. "I am now going to recite Julian Winter's message," the Specter said. "I did my job. If you are unhappy with how I do my job, you are free to do it for me. My job has to be done one way or another. Do it for me, and I don't have to do it myself." "That is the message," the Specter said. The Tinkerer furrowed her brows. She wasn't sure what the Specter meant. However, the champion knew exactly what it meant, and he clenched his fists in rage. Do his job for him. Julian was telling the champion that he had simply done the job of the envious researcher. He had dealt with humanity's advancement. And if the champion was unhappy with how Julian did it, he was free to do it for him. Julian was using him. Julian was forcing the champion to do his job for him. After all, if the champion didn't, Julian would keep doing his job like this. All of Aegis had been crippled. They had not lost a single person, and their extractors were still as powerful as ever. But he had essentially crippled Aegis' eyes, ears, and mouth. They would need to build a completely new database and set up all the parameters again. They would need to gather all the knowledge again and put it back. That would take years. And after years or decades, they would be right back where they'd been just 2 hours ago. "Can I go into my containment unit now?" the Specter asked. At that moment, the champion's rage exploded. Bang! He vaporized the Specter on the spot. The Tinkerer gulped nervously as she looked at the smoking stain on the ground. "I have to deal with things. Excuse me," she said carefully, quickly bowing before leaving the office. The champion just gritted his teeth and put his head in his hands again. Chapter 867. Nick felt an overwhelming influx of suffering coming his way. And that's that, he thought. The amount of suffering he had inflicted on Aegis was tremendous. Hundreds of heroes and researchers would need to recreate a database and fill it up again. Almost all the technology connected to the database in any way needed to be reimagined and changed. And worst of all, the researchers would think they had to reinvent the wheel for decades. They would not be making any progress. For a researcher, this was the worst. Researchers were supposed to find new things, not remake the same thing over and over. Tens of protectors, hundreds of heroes, and all of the shields would suffer. All of their operations needed to change. As more time passed, Nick felt more and more suffering coming toward him from all over the world. Did he torture anyone? No. Did he kill people? No. Did he endanger some cities? A little, but that would be quickly fixed. The only thing he did was make Aegis do meaningless busy work. Boredom. He caused immense boredom to the strongest extractors in the world. This will actually benefit you in the long run, Nick thought. Your database was archaic and had too many weaknesses. Hope you learn from this and make a better one. Based on the predicted intensity of suffering, I will become a peak fallen in about 20 years. Also, we got a good researcher out of this deal. Manjurian will be a good addition to our team. "Oh, son," Nick said, activating the recording function of the sun. "Since I can no longer access Aegis easily, I dealt with their progress in a more direct manner. Softly pushing them in a direction doesn't work anymore, due to my new status as Aegis enemy, so I encrypted their database and destroyed the key. It will take Aegis anywhere from 20 to 40 years to recover the knowledge they lost today. If you wish for me to operate differently from now on, please tell me, Nick said. And he waited in an isolated location for around a week. The sun needed to sense him if it wanted to contact him. The aliens most likely checked the messages daily, but Nick wanted to be sure. Even after a full week, the sun didn't contact him. If it actually wanted me to help humanity, it would definitely contact me and tell me this is not okay, Nick thought. But it doesn't. They want to keep human technology suppressed for as long as possible. The aliens are probably exhilarated by what I've done. If the aliens had human emotions, they would probably call each other over to look at how the funny humans had been screwed over. It was such a simple thing. Just encryption. Something used constantly. A couple of lines of code. A couple of lines of words and numbers had ruined Aegis for decades. When the sun didn't get back to him, Nick traveled back to the underground city. By now, he was done transcribing all the biological knowledge. As Nick returned, he looked at the new set of containment units at the back of the underground city. Inside were small, gray humanoid figures. They had no features and just stood in the middle of the containment units. From time to time, an extractor entered to dump kilos upon kilos of Zephyx onto them. These were the artificial Specters. They had no survival instincts or personality. They were essentially just plants. They absorbed their Zephyx, grew bigger, and finally would be consumed by a peak expert. The first specialists using these Specters to advance had already been created. The speed of their growth broke all records. 30 years. That was all it would take for an initial specialist to become an initial hero. It was terrifyingly fast. In terms of Zephyx generation, all the new specialists had the talent to become level 9 extractors. The 5th level no longer decided someone's future potential. Becoming a newbie was easy. Becoming a John was easy. Becoming a veteran was a bit annoying, but also relatively easy. Becoming an expert was just a bit time-consuming. Becoming a specialist was easy. Becoming a hero required a lot of studying and practice in Zephyx manipulation, but over 70% of extractors could do that also relatively easily. With more advancements in teaching methods and better education, that number would also rise to over 90% with time. 90% of the babies born in the underground city would eventually become heroes. Tens of thousands of heroes. The underground city would have more heroes than the entire world. This is the true power of humanity. This is the true power of our resistance, Nick thought. Sadly, becoming a protector was not easy, and Nick wasn't sure he could even make it easier. It required a lot of willpower and dedication, and most humans simply didn't have that. However, around 10 to 20% of the heroes would still manage it. That would still leave the underground city with thousands of protectors. All of Aegis had less than 100. With thousands of peak protectors, the underground city would easily suppress Aegis as long as the champion didn't join the fight. And yet, Nick looked at the sun. Even millions of protectors won't make a difference. Even millions of shields wouldn't matter. We need level 9 extractors, and many of them. Even more, they need to be able to deal with star energy and pure energy. This will become much more difficult. Humanity needs to be reimagined on a fundamental level. We need humans that grow with pure energy, not Zephyx. None of the existing humans are up to par. They are from the last generation, and we need the new generation to fight the aliens. Nick looked back at the underground city. I already have an idea, but I need to know more about star energy and pure energy to actualize my plan. The knowledge is transcribed, and my job as the envious researcher has been dealt with. My advancement to peak fallen is also secure. It's time to pay a visit to the 3rd knowledge repository. Knowledge about the energies. Chapter 868. Nick went deep underground and flew toward Aegis headquarters. The next knowledge repository was below the old city of New York. It was risky for Nick to come anywhere close to death, but he had no other choice. Luckily, the ground was amazing at isolating senses, and the base was so far underground that death probably never saw it. Nick went deeper into the ground. 10 kilometers, 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers. At a depth of 100 kilometers, he stopped descending. The surroundings were so incredibly hot and chaotic that even Nick's senses were disoriented. Still, he could withstand it. Even a demon would be able to withstand the heat, though it would not be pleasant. Due to the distorting effects on Nick's senses, it took him several hours to actually find the base. The only reason he found it at all was the slight decrease in temperature in the area. Since this base had to use a similar Zephyx generator as Deep Core base, the temperature around it had to be colder. After a while, he entered a space that was extremely cold. The base was close. Eventually, he found it. "Assistant, can you sense the base in front of me?" Nick asked. "No connection," Assistant answered. Nick frowned. So this base is not operational. But the surroundings are still cold. If the Zephyx generator didn't work, the area around it would be just as hot as everywhere else. Nick searched for the entrance and found it after a while. He expected the entrance to be deactivated, but surprisingly, there was an active panel beside it. The base is actually operational, he thought. "Still no connection?" Nick asked. "No connection," Assistant answered. The presence of this panel is already strange, Nick thought. All the Enlightened One's technology works by using a seed as an intermediary. As Nick activated the panel, writing appeared. "Welcome to Piercing Heaven Base," it read. "Are you in possession of a working seed?" Nick pressed the yes button. "Connection established," Assistant said. "Keep all lights deactivated. Put the base on standby and only activate a function if I tell you to," Nick ordered. "Authority as Emperor has been established," Assistant said. "You have administrative access over Piercing Heaven Base." "Open the gate," Nick ordered. A force field washed over Nick, pushing all the rubble away. Then the door opened and Nick entered. The entrance closed again, and all the rubble crashed into it. Nick's senses were no longer suppressed, and he looked through the base. It's much smaller, he thought. From the outside it seems almost 2 by 2 kilometers, but the inside is barely 100 meters high. That means something below me is taking up a lot of space. Is it the knowledge repository? Activate the database and give me a summary of Piercing Heaven Base's purpose, Nick ordered. Piercing Heaven Base acts as a storage for Zephyx. There is no other purpose, Assistant answered. Zephyx, how much Zephyx is stored here? Nick asked. Approximately 30 million tons. Nick's eyes widened. 30 million tons, he thought. How much space would that take up? He looked at the ground. That explains the big empty space beneath me. How long did it take the Enlightened Ones to create that much Zephyx? That was when Nick realized what was going on. The generator is still running, and if it isn't using the Zephyx, it has to be stored somewhere. So for thousands of years, this base gathered Zephyx from the planet and stored it all. 30 million tons. Creating a peak elder took about 1.2 tons. This meant this amount of Zephyx could create about 25 million peak elders. Nick did some other calculations. The cities have to pay between 15 to 50 tons of Zephyx to Aegis every year. With about 1,000 cities in the world, that would be between 15 to 50,000 tons of Zephyx that Aegis receives every year. This is what all cities in the world produce over the span of about 1,000 years, give or take. "Show me the reactor's output," Nick said. "The reactor produces about 1,400 tons of Zephyx per year," Assistant answered. Nick did some quick calculations. About 21,000 years. This reactor has been running continuously for about 21,000 years, he thought. Finally, he had a timeline. This reactor was probably created quite late, during the Enlightened One's era. The current era has been going for about 5 to 6,000 years. The Suffering Ones existed for 10 to 30,000 years. This most likely means the Suffering Ones existed for about 15,000 years, based on this generator's output. Logically, this means the Enlightened Ones had their final battle between 20 to 21,000 years ago. The Recovering Ones existed for a bit longer than the Suffering Ones, if we go with 20,000 years. The Enlightened Ones also existed for about 3,000 years or so. That means the Ancient Ones died about 43,000 to 46,000 years ago. This Zephyx mine, referring to Earth, has been running for that long. Tens of thousands of years of artificially created suffering on all of humanity. Finally, the timeline was clear. Nick took a deep breath. Then he focused on Piercing Heaven Base again. "Use my authority as Emperor to retrieve top-secret data," Nick said. "One file has been found. Do you wish to integrate it?" Assistant asked. "Yes," Nick said. A moment later, a map of the base appeared in front of Nick, and a containment unit was added. Once more, Nick had to cut through the floor to reach the containment unit. Luckily, he had his sanctuary with him, which also contained a couple of weapons. Without the weapons from Deep Core Base, he wouldn't have been able to cut through the floor. Nick approached the containment unit and read out all information regarding the Specter. The Ice Maiden, Nick read, grows more powerful by freezing humans. It is important to note that it grows stronger by causing sensations of freezing. Killing humans does not benefit the Ice Maiden. Peak level 8. Chapter 869. The Ice Maiden, Nick thought. Specters want food and this one prefers living humans. It won't be as easy to feed as the Jolly Cannibal. Open employee entrance. Keep all defenses at max. I don't want any of the Specters cold to touch me, Nick said. Affirmative, assistant answered. Nick didn't want to come into contact with the Specters cold because that should produce Zephyx but wouldn't. After all, Nick was a Specter. It was better that the Specter didn't know that. A door appeared in the containment unit's wall, and Nick stepped inside. In the middle of the containment unit was a beautiful woman with long, icy blue hair. When she saw Nick, she smiled brightly. Then a wave of unimaginable cold shot right at him. Crack. However, a force field appeared between Nick and the cold, isolating it completely. When the Ice Maiden saw that, she pouted. Really, you're not even giving me a little snack after so long. I do not work with Specters myself, Nick said. My identity needs to remain pure and untouched. The Ice Maiden scowled. Then what's the point of talking to you? I might not be your food, but I can give you food, Nick answered. I am the new Emperor of Mankind, and I can make sure you get plenty of it. The Ice Maiden looked at Nick with a bit of skepticism, a bit weak for an emperor. And yet, that is my status, despite my lack of power, Nick answered. I have already acquired the knowledge from the engineering repository and the biology repository. You are next on my list. Oh, you already got 2 of them, the Ice Maiden answered in fake surprise. Naturally, she was only acting human. What were they like? You don't believe me? Nick asked. Call it healthy skepticism, she said with a small smirk. One was the Jolly Cannibal, Nick answered. He was quite talkative. What does he look like? She asked. Normal guy, nothing special, Nick answered. What about the other one? She asked. A bit more special, but he also looked like a regular human. If you know about him, you know he's probably the most special of all of you. Oh, what makes him so special? The Ice Maiden asked. I'm not telling you, Nick said. I'm not sure if you know about him. The Ice Maiden furrowed her brows. Fine, I believe you, she said. So, what are you going to give me in exchange for my knowledge? Cooperation, Nick answered. I can't eat cooperation, she answered. You can, Nick said, but only if you cooperate in turn. Can you stop being vague? The Ice Maiden asked in annoyance. Humanity is not yet strong enough to produce level 8 extractors, Nick said. Let's just say the suppression factor increased quite a bit after the Empire failed in the final battle. The Ice Maiden hummed for a bit. Like the other knowledge repositories, she knew about the true enemy and the Empire's plan. What I can offer is several level 7 extractors willing to work with you regularly. With time, they'll also become more powerful, Nick said. Well, if that's the best you can do, I guess I have to be fine with some scraps, she said. However, if you want food, I need to move this base, and I'd ask for your cooperation. We might be very far down, but if you attack the containment unit, you'll use up a lot of Zephyx due to its anti-vibration function. If the enemy realizes what's going on, we'll be in trouble, and I don't think I need to tell you what happens if they find you. The Ice Maiden frowned a bit. You're not supposed to move the base, she said. Well, if you want food, I don't have another option, Nick said. Humanity is severely suppressed, and this base is nowhere near our actual one. I can't send level 7 extractors to travel thousands of kilometers every time you want food. For some reason, the Ice Maiden seemed troubled. It almost looked like she didn't like the idea of moving the base. The base is supposed to remain here, she said, but I can travel with you on my own. You know exactly that's not an option, Nick answered. You already know everything about engineering, right? She asked. There should be something you can do with that to make sure I won't pose a danger to you. Sure, there are a couple of devices that would keep you in line, Nick said, but you're not a regular Specter. You know about star energy, pure energy, and Zephyx. There's a good chance you could break out. Using old-fashioned sturdy metal to contain you seems to be the only secure way, and I can't just transport your containment unit on its own, Nick explained. The Ice Maiden frowned in annoyance and stayed silent for a couple of seconds. "Tell me more about the new empire," she said. "Sure," Nick answered. Nick told her about the secret underground city and how it was growing. He also told her about the humans on the surface, but he wasn't very accurate. In his version, Aegis was just a collection of a couple of protectors, led by the champion of light, an agent of the sun. "Where do you plan to take the base?" she asked. "About 20 kilometers below the city," Nick said. "I will create a fortified corridor that only a select few extractors can access." The Ice Maiden looked away for a while. "The Emperor was very clear that we are not supposed to move the bases," she mumbled. "But you're the new Emperor." Finally, she took a deep breath. "If you can get permission from the biology repository, you may move the base," she said. "Sure, I'll go ask," Nick said, then left the containment unit. Chapter 870. Nick left Piercing Heaven base and went back to Deep Core base. He didn't want to fake asking for permission, since there were probably checks in place to catch that. He had to work within the Empire's rules if he wanted their support. Nick quickly reactivated the Pure One's containment unit and entered. "Sorry to disturb you so soon after our farewell," Nick said. "There's an issue with the Ice Maiden." The Pure One took a deep breath. "Yes?" he asked. Nick explained the issue and his plan to move the base. The Pure One frowned and fell into thought for a while. "Tell me more about the plan," he said. Nick did. "Deep Core base has to remain here. It's too important," the Pure One said. "Rising Star base can't be moved. If you fail, it will be difficult for future generations to find our safeguards, assuming you move the base." Nick frowned. "Piercing Heaven base is too deep underground. Nobody is going to find that anyway. The secondary knowledge repositories are most likely all lost. The only way to find Deep Core base or Piercing Heaven base is by coming into contact with Rising Star base." The Pure One remained silent. "You may move Piercing Heaven base and Night Sky base, but Deep Core base and Rising Star base have to remain where they are," he said. "I assume Night Sky base is the last knowledge repository?" Nick asked. The Pure One wordlessly nodded. After learning the names of the 4 bases, Nick could see the naming scheme. From the Deep Core, a star would rise into the sky and pierce the heavens, creating the night. "What am I supposed to tell the Ice Maiden?" Nick asked. The Specters had always acted like they didn't know about each other, but that seemed to be a ruse. They were probably supposed to keep that knowledge secret. "Tell her that my father would shrug and say it's not his problem anymore," the Pure One said. "Your father?" Nick asked with raised brows. "The Emperor," the Pure One said. Nick's eyes widened. "I assume I forgot to mention that part," the Pure One said. "After my creation, I was raised by the Emperor. He raised me like his own child and taught me what it meant to be human. Raising a Specter like a child. That was more than unusual. And yet it worked out in this case. Then I will move Piercing Heaven base. You know where I'm going to move it. If I fail, you can tell the new Emperor where it is," Nick said. The Pure One wordlessly nodded. Nick said his goodbyes, left the containment unit, and deactivated it again. Then he traveled back to Piercing Heaven base and entered the Ice Maiden's containment unit. "I am allowed to move the base," Nick said. "Oh, what did the biology Specter say?" she asked. "He said his father would shrug and say it's not his problem anymore," Nick said. The Ice Maiden became distracted. It was almost like she was lost in memories, which was very unusual for a Specter. "You really have Pure's trust," she said. "If he gave you permission to potentially compromise the Empire's safeguards, he must truly believe in your power and character." As expected, they know about each other, Nick thought. "We were all raised together, you know," she said. "I didn't," Nick answered. "Pure was the prince, and we other 3 were his servants. We used to be an experiment. Pure was the only artificial Specter, while we were natural Specters. Pure was the last safeguard, while we were supposed to help him." Nick frowned. "Raising a natural Specter like a human is dangerous, you know that." The Ice Maiden nodded. "Yes, we do not have feelings. It might seem like I am lost in thought, but I am just imitating what I've learned. I am not human, and I do not feel like a human, but after centuries of living among humans, I adapted. I may not be human, but I think of myself as human." The Ice Maiden chuckled bitterly. "I'm a cat that believes she's a mouse." Pure advanced without any issues. He didn't need to cause suffering. Meanwhile, we other 3 had to cause a lot of suffering to reach our current levels of power. It was strange. When I tortured all those countless humans, I felt nothing. I saw myself as human as well, but when I caused so much suffering, it just didn't seem strange. In fact, it felt natural. It felt like that was what I was supposed to do. It felt right. And that scared me, or I believe I would be scared if I could feel these things. It felt so natural to destroy all the beauty of humanity. And yet, with every act of torture, I destroyed part of humanity's beauty. I didn't want to destroy it, but I also did not want to destroy it. The Ice Maiden sighed. All of this is such a mess. She shook her head. Go move Piercing Heaven base. I won't do anything. Nick nodded and left the containment unit. It was a bit interesting to listen to the Specter's past, but he had more important things to do. Every second of wasted time represented thousands of humans suffering immense torture. Assistant, activate Piercing Heaven base. Keep all lights deactivated, he ordered. Affirmative, Assistant answered. The entire base started to hum as several machines came to life. Nick asked for several reports on the base's functionality and deactivated some parts. Deactivate the central Zephyx generator. Use the Zephyx storage for energy. Affirmative, Assistant answered. Nick walked out of the base and stopped beside it. Then he waited. A couple of hours later, his surroundings started to heat up. The cold vanished, and the moving magma deep inside the earth washed over Piercing Heaven base. The spatial fixator had been deactivated as well, which meant Piercing Heaven base was being slowly swept away by the magma. Then Nick charged at the base and pushed it. On his own, he wouldn't have been able to move it, but the endless magma helped him. Chapter 871. Nick had to activate and deactivate the spatial fixture whenever the flow of magma didn't move in the desired direction. Activating it cost a lot of energy, but Piercing Heaven had so much Zephyx it didn't matter. Progress was slow. Very slow. It took Nick 5 months to move the base to its destination. In the end, he fixed it in place about 20 kilometers below the underground city. For now, he kept the base running on its enormous storage of Zephyx. Activating the Zephyx generator this close to the city could be troublesome. The Zephyx generator created Zephyx by stealing potential from life itself. If left unchecked, it would cause sickness and death inside the underground city. Luckily, the base didn't need much Zephyx to operate, and the underground city produced enough to meet its needs. After fixing the base in place, Nick started the process of creating a long corridor. The underground city could make materials treated with pure energy, but they weren't yet advanced enough to produce materials that could resist the power of Fallen. In a couple of decades, that would change. After all, Nick had used the sanctuary to transport many machines from Deep Core Base to the underground city. The researchers only needed to find ways to properly use the machines and give them the energy they needed. For now, Nick had to create his own materials. Creating the materials needed for such a long corridor and building it took several weeks. After that, Nick had a long shaft leading from the most secure place in the underground city to Piercing Heaven base. The entrance to the shaft was in a place only protectors had access to, and only if they'd proven trustworthy. Nick told Samar and Arya about Piercing Heaven base and showed it to them. Since the city now had access to several machines created by the Enlightened Ones, the two of them already had seeds of their own. Nick granted them authority, second only to the Emperor. Everyone else was denied access, and while the protectors could see the entrance to Piercing Heaven base, they weren't allowed to enter without Samar or Arya. Thanks to their seeds, Samar and Arya could learn about the base on their own without Nick showing them around. When they saw the endless storage of Zephyx, they had to take deep breaths. This would solve their Zephyx needs for centuries. With this much Zephyx, none of the experts needed to wait anymore to become specialists. Finally, Nick led them to the Ice Maiden. The door opened, and the three of them entered. "We arrived," the Ice Maiden asked. "Piercing Heaven base is now connected to the underground city," Nick said. "These are the two leaders of the underground city. They'll be dealing with your food supply from now on." The Ice Maiden sighed. "I don't really care about the food," she said. "That was just an act since we're supposed to keep our origins secret." "That doesn't matter," Nick answered. "You are a great source of growth for our protectors, and the Zephyx stored here is also of significant importance. Even if you hadn't asked for food, I would have moved the base regardless." The Ice Maiden nodded. "You may come here whenever you want," Nick told Samar and Arya. "The Ice Maiden is not dangerous." The two of them were a bit unsure about that. After all, this was a peak adversary. But since it was Nick who told them, they believed him. "I will remain here until I've gathered all the knowledge," Nick said. "You two may come and go as you please since you know me, but I don't want anyone else here until I'm gone." "Understood," Samar said before leaving the containment unit. "I'll stay for my daily dose of Zephyx," Arya said, sitting down. Nick sat a distance away from her. Freezing air gathered around the Ice Maiden before gently drifting toward Arya. Arya's body began to freeze on the surface, and she had to take a deep breath. It was painful. Freezing felt very similar to burning. That was because both caused damage in a similar way. Burning denatured a body's natural composition, turning one chemical element into another. Freezing did something similar. It didn't denature the chemical elements, but it ruined cells. In both cases, the cells would no longer be usable. However, as an experienced extractor, Arya could deal with the pain. This was just another workday for her. Meanwhile, Nick took out a small device and connected it with his mind. "Tell me about the energies," he said, activating the device. This device was an information storage unit, and if Nick learned anything, the device would learn it too. This way, he wouldn't need to transcribe the information manually. Of course, such a device could only be created by someone who knew a lot about engineering and biology, which Nick now did. "Then I will start with Prefix and Zephyx," the Ice Maiden said. Nick nodded. As she began explaining, Arya left the containment unit. She'd already gotten her fill of Zephyx and would be back the next day. Arya came and went several times, as Nick learned from the Ice Maiden. Most of what she said about Prefix and Zephyx was something Nick already knew. However, after just a couple of weeks, the Ice Maiden started talking about aspects of these energies unknown to him. For example, the creation of Prefix from star energy. Humanity didn't create Prefix since there was no point in it. Prefix was essentially trash, and their atmosphere was already flooded with it. However, knowing how to make it would explain many other things. Chapter 872. Prefix was useless. It was toxic. It was waste. Prefix was like ash. Getting energy out of it was almost impossible, since it had already given off all its energy when it turned to ash. Yet compared to ash, Prefix couldn't easily be used to raise plants. Nothing consumed Prefix since it was just horrible. On other planets, Prefix represented contamination. It spread across worlds like toxic dirt. Being in an area with a high density of Prefix would damage lifeforms using star energy or pure energy. The worst part was that it didn't gather in one spot. It just spread into individual particles that mixed with everything else. The enlightened ones had never seen any other worlds, but they could make educated guesses about how Prefix would affect life there. One shocking fact was how the evolution of biological life forms in relation to pure energy could endanger the survival of an entire planet. Prefix was produced when star energy lost all its energy. If a kind of plant grew incredibly powerful by consuming star energy, it would also give off Prefix. Over many years, this would increase the density of Prefix on the planet, making survival impossible for many kinds of life. Only the strongest and oldest plants would resist the Prefix. The younger plants would wither and die. This would leave a planet with only a couple of mighty plants, the rest devoid of life. Eventually, the Prefix would become so dense that not even the mighty plants could gather star energy anymore. Then they too would die, leaving a dead world behind. It would take thousands of years for star energy to wash the Prefix from the planet, and new life would appear. This time, it had to hope nothing developed an affinity for star energy. The enlightened ones believed the aliens gathered a gigantic amount of Prefix and sent it into the solar system. The force field kept the Prefix from reaching Earth, but it still surrounded the planet from a distance. This disturbed their sensors, making it harder to aim their weapons. That was when the aliens used their powerful warriors in a devastating attack. The enlightened ones believed many alien warriors died, but in the end, at least one managed to reach Earth. And that was the end of it. Humanity couldn't use their weaponry to target things on Earth. This would make Earth inhospitable. Humanity capitulated. Slavery was better than extinction. The aliens acted like they accepted the surrender, and over the years, they built the sun. And when it was built, it killed all but a very few genetically altered humans. The other colonized planets were eradicated shortly after. That was how Earth became a Zephyx mine. At least, that was the Enlightened One's best guess. The existence of Prefix had been a decisive factor in the war. If humanity had learned to deal with it, they most likely would have won. Prefix was contamination, but it could also be used as a weapon. After talking about Prefix for a long time, the Ice Maiden moved on to Zephyx. Zephyx was amazing. It had an incredible density of energy and was also stable. However, creating it was not easy. It could only be created when potential was consumed. It directly opposed entropy. It stole energy from its surroundings and gathered it in one spot. Even more, it refused to let go of that energy. It did not disperse again. Humanity could have used Zephyx production to solve their Prefix problem, but not on Earth itself. They would need to use other planets as Zephyx mines, and while humanity had stretched across the solar system, the Enlightened Ones believed only one such plan existed during the era of the Ancient Ones. However, compared to other worlds, Earth had an intelligent species. Humans quickly figured out what was happening and experimented with these plants. This new kind of energy gave them a scientific breakthrough, letting them realize things they'd never thought possible. Over time, they also learned to use star energy and discovered pure energy. As for the Prefix, they just dumped it into outer space. The Prefix couldn't gather on Earth, thanks to an artificial repellent. Over the years, a lot of it gathered on the other planets in the solar system. Within a couple million years, this would become troublesome, but humanity would find a way to deal with it before then. For now, they used pure energy to travel to the stars. And then they met the aliens, life forms that inherently worked with pure energy. A huge war broke out. Humanity was not as advanced as the aliens, but humanity was really good at one thing: destroying things and building things that destroyed other things. While their technology was inferior, their sheer firepower was superior. Humanity should have won the war, but two things led to its defeat. First, humanity was strong, but one human was weak. The powerful aliens could travel through space with just their bodies, and the strongest of them could destroy entire planets. If even a single one reached Earth, humanity would be helpless. But humanity's firepower was tremendous. None of the aliens managed to reach Earth before being turned into nothingness. That was when humanity's second weakness came into play. They didn't know how to deal with Prefix, and it hadn't yet reached the next solar system. If humanity had had just a couple more centuries, it might have learned to deal with the Prefix. And then it wouldn't have lost against the aliens. The Ice Maiden didn't have much to say about Zephyx's potential. It was incredibly dense and stable, but that stability also made it hard to manipulate. It was essentially just a high-density energy storage. Star energy was also not very manipulable. Easier than Zephyx, but not by much. But pure energy was amazing. You could do anything with it. But you needed Zephyx to create it. As the Ice Maiden talked about pure energy, Nick realized something. Organisms working with pure energy are strictly and inarguably superior to organisms working with Zephyx. Manipulating pure energy is more than 50 times easier than manipulating Zephyx. If I worked with pure energy, I could create powerful abilities in just a few short years. The aliens are more powerful than expected. Most likely, they all have more powerful abilities than the Specters, and more of them. Additionally, space is their playground. They're like fish in water there, surrounded by star energy. Meanwhile, Specters would be like birds in water, fine for a short moment but not for long. I need to quickly become an adversary and change my body to work with pure energy if I want a chance at taking down the aliens. But I also need humans who use pure energy. There's still a lot to do. Chapter 873. The Ice Maiden talked about pure energy next, and Nick's guesses proved true. Pure energy was extraordinary. It could strengthen organic and inorganic matter without any downsides. It just put more energy into the matter. It did not alter the matter in any way. Iron stayed flexible. Diamonds stayed tough. Cells stayed malleable but became more resistant. Nick already knew all of that. What he didn't know was that pure energy could also be transformed into heat and movement. He had suspected as much, and the Ice Maiden confirmed it. Apparently, the apocalyptic weapons the Ancient Ones used were based on pure energy. The first milestone in humanity's capacity for destruction was dynamite, which could level houses. The next was nuclear fission, which could level an entire town. Then came nuclear fusion, which could destroy a city and even endanger the planet's biosphere, given a big enough payload. But that wasn't the end. Next, the Ancient Ones made antimatter bombs. The antimatter fused with matter, turning all of it into energy. With these, they could destroy hundreds of kilometers of land. That alone was powerful enough to kill a shield. But they still weren't done. Antimatter bombs were difficult to deliver, so they built antimatter lasers. One swing of the laser from orbit could create antimatter bomb-level explosions in a line across a continent. Each explosion was as powerful as an antimatter bomb, but they could create hundreds of them within a second. At that point, the Ancient Ones had already created weaponry that could destroy entire planets. Theoretically, if they just kept the laser pointed at one spot, it would dig into the planet's core and destroy it. Of course, using these weapons was unreasonably expensive and dangerous. And yet they still weren't done. Humans wanted more power, more destruction, so they turned to pure energy. The most powerful weapon the Ancient Ones made went back to basics. Missiles, nuclear fusion missile that could fly at unreasonably fast speeds. They burned pure energy for speed, and it also boosted the power of the explosion. The Ancient Ones tested that weapon once. They fired it at Pluto. It took a while to arrive, but as soon as it did, the explosion completely enveloped the planet. Humanity had done it. They had created a weapon that could kill even a theoretical level 10 extractor. But humanity still wasn't done. They wanted to go further. Their next project was improving the antimatter laser with pure energy. That would have truly been a universe-ending weapon. But before they could make significant headway, they met the aliens. While they were desperately working on their pure energy-backed antimatter laser, the aliens closed in. The pure energy fusion missiles killed many of the aliens' strongest warriors. But then the aliens used Prefix to mess with the targeting system. One of their most powerful warriors reached Earth, and then it was over. Sure, humans could fire more missiles, but what then? They had seen what the missile did to Pluto. That would completely destroy Earth. If one of these missiles detonated on Earth, it would be like a horse taking a huge bite out of an apple. Earth would turn into a crescent. If humans had finished their pure energy antimatter laser, they would definitely have won the war. In the end, it came down to different applications of pure energy. Humanity used it in technology, the aliens used it in biology. External power versus internal power. Computers versus organisms. The organisms won, but it had been extremely close. The Ice Maiden went into detail on how pure energy worked and how it could be transformed into different things. Surprisingly, it only took Nick 5 years to understand everything. Quite a bit faster than before. The reason was that these were all fundamentals. Purely theoretical. Just physics. This was simply how the world worked. It didn't cover how to apply these things, since the engineering and biology repositories had already handled that. After grasping the fundamentals of the energies, Nick finally understood how all the machines and biological alterations worked. Now he could truly recreate all the technology of the Enlightened Ones. There were no more unknowns in how the machines worked. Nick deactivated the listening device and stood up. "I hope you succeed," the Ice Maiden said with a sigh. "I would like to go out again someday. I've waited so long for this, and now that we have another shot, I'm getting antsy." Nick glanced at her. The Ice Maiden's mentality was complex and contradictory at times. As a Specter, she didn't feel things. She'd said so herself. And yet she acted like she felt things, and compared to other Specters, she even believed it herself. It was like she believed her own lie. She believed the mask she wore was her true face. In that case, did she have emotions or not? Did she have desires beyond growing stronger and surviving? Nick didn't dwell on it. This entered the realm of philosophy, and what Nick hated most about philosophy was its abstract nature. Whenever anything entered that realm, it was basically impossible to reach a concrete answer. It always boiled down to uncertain possibilities. There's no right answer, Nick thought. It all just depends on someone's beliefs. There's no point thinking about this. I've got more important things to do. I will do my best, Nick said. The Ice Maiden sighed. That's all I can ask for. Chapter 874. Nick left the containment unit and returned to the underground city. He decided against visiting the last knowledge repository for now. The reason was that the energy manipulation repository related strictly to creating abilities and understanding one's own power. It was simply the application of pure energy, star energy, and Zephyx to increasing personal power. That would matter once humanity could produce a new kind of human able to work with pure energy. Nick also couldn't use star energy or pure energy himself. It would be more useful to learn these things once his disguise ability advanced again. For now, he needed to focus on humanity's future. All the pieces were there. The knowledge was available. Engineering, biology, and energy. Now he just needed to turn these concepts into reality. After putting the knowledge about energies into the archive, Nick withdrew. For the first time, he would actually be researching. Not learning from others, but creating new knowledge himself. There were several things he needed to fight the aliens. 1. He needed humans who could live in the darkness while also working with pure energy. Right now, there was no way for both to be true at once. 2. He needed these humans to reach the 9th level. 3. He needed to increase his personal power enough to infiltrate the alien base. 4. He needed to learn enough about alien technology to manipulate it. These 4 things were necessary. If all 4 held true, humanity could free itself from the aliens. The knowledge about energy manipulation would only matter for the 2nd step. For now, he'd focus on the 1st. He needed to create humans immune to the darkness, not allergic to star energy or pure energy, and able to use those energies to grow stronger. He had to alter the very fundamentals of humanity. He needed to reinvent cells, significantly alter the genome, and put it all into practice. This would take a while. This alteration would be even more significant than what the Enlightened Ones had done. Nick looked at how the Enlightened Ones had changed their humans. They did 2 things. First, they improved and isolated their Zephyx synchronizers. There was no reason to abandon Zephyx as a power source, so they kept the synchronizers. But they changed them so they wouldn't weaken humans against star energy or pure energy. At the same time, they created an implant that isolated the energies from each other. This was the thing Nick had seen inside the Nightmare's body. A spinning dodecahedron. Called a firmament. A firmament acted as a whiteboard for Zephyx. In a way, it was an altered artificial Specter core surrounding the Zephyx synchronizer. Humans could create manipulation lines on the inside of the firmament, granting them abilities. At the same time, the firmament isolated the Zephyx synchronizer from star energy and pure energy. This let humans walk the path of an extractor without it interfering with their body. The firmament stopped all Zephyx from entering the body. This meant Zephyx did not increase the power of the Enlightened Ones' bodies and minds. It was simply a storage of energy they could use to launch abilities and attacks. The second thing they did was alter the genome, so humans received a new organ. Located between the intestines, it was called a human core. The human core was connected to the body and mind, and it worked with pure energy. A small, very sturdy channel connected the firmament with the human core. As Zephyx entered the channel, star energy absorbed by the skin would gather around it. Several complex biological processes then turned the star energy in Zephyx into pure energy. Profix was created during the process and discharged through the skin. Finally, the pure energy reached the human core, which spread it throughout the body, enhancing it. This way, the human retained their Specter-granted abilities, while also benefiting from pure energy. This was how the Enlightened Ones worked. There were several other enhancements, but these all related to the path to power tied to pure energy. Like Extractors, the Enlightened Ones also had several levels, which they called realms. Naturally, this path to power was separate from an Extractor's and required its own resources and methods. It was quite a good system. Nick couldn't find a fault in it. Sadly, he couldn't use it. The aliens had already studied the Enlightened Ones, and Nick was certain they'd found a way to counter these humans. Most likely, they'd created some kind of weapon that would mess with the firmament or the channel. Maybe they could force the firmament to send far too much Zephyx through the channel, breaking it and letting Zephyx roam through the body. This would essentially poison the human and leave them powerless. Alternatively, they could mess with the complex biological processes in the channel. If that process were stopped, pure Zephyx would pump straight into the human core. There, the Zephyx would be strengthened by the volatile nature of pure energy, using up all the power the human had while clogging space for new pure energy. It would be like pumping a stone into a heart. There were a few more ways to sabotage the biology, and Nick had to guard against all of them. He couldn't be sure what the aliens would use to counter these humans, so he had to prepare for all of it. He had to reinvent the entire thing. And that would take time. A lot of time. Chapter 875. Failure. One failure after another. Nick had already created his own laboratory, filled with machines from deep core base. While he knew as much about biology as the enlightened ones, he couldn't just theorize a completely new kind of human. He needed to test things. He needed to experiment. He was treading new ground, and while he was right in his predictions most of the time, there were also times he was wrong. The enlightened ones knew a lot, but they didn't know everything. 25 years had already passed, and Nick had become a peak fallen, but he had made no significant progress yet. He looked at the growing tubes filled with artificial fetuses with a frown. None of them were developing in a desirable way. Half died to the nightmare after forming a nervous system, while the other half couldn't make use of the nourishing solution filled with pure energy. Usually, a mother's womb would isolate the fetus from the nightmare's influence. Nick could create an artificial womb that did the same, but that wasn't his goal. He wanted to create a human immune to the nightmare from the beginning. He had come up with several different methods, but none of them truly worked. Progress was extremely slow. While Nick was stuck in his lab, the underground city grew more powerful. Hundreds of heroes had already appeared. Luckily, the material of the underground city shell could isolate not only Nurse Alice, but also the Maw. Theoretically, the city could create shields without fear of the Maw, but that would just postpone the problem. As soon as any of them came into contact with the outside world, the Maw would activate and abduct them all. Additionally, Nick, Samar, and Arya all agreed there should be no shields in the underground city. Shields had the power to damage the city's shell, putting everyone and everything at risk. The only way to ensure the shell wouldn't break was to make sure nobody had the power to break it. Nick was the only one who could damage it, and that was how it was supposed to be. Theoretically, Nick could create a material that could even withstand the power of shields. The huge storage of Zephyx made that possible. However, it would take forever. It would eat decades upon decades of Nick's time. He would also need to reconstruct everything, taking even more time. And for what? For some shields. Even 1,000,000 shields would die like insects to the aliens. In fact, even 1,000,000 level 9 extractors wouldn't make a difference. As soon as the sun broke, star energy would wash over them and kill them all. No matter how powerful the humans in the underground city became, they would still be useless. The fundamentals of the universe made sure of that. Lastly, there was another danger to having too many powerful extractors. The enlightened ones had a plan to deal with the sun. And yet the sun somehow found out. Were the enlightened ones bad at staying hidden? No. Their safeguards had been even stronger than Nick's. Because of that, Nick believed there was some kind of sensor that could measure the planet's energy level as a whole. A lot of power put weight on spacetime. It had no gravitational effect, but it was still noticeable. The aliens might not sense one level 9 extractor, but they could probably sense several of them together. Nick had to find the balance between having power and having too much of it. None of the humans alive right now could help in the battle against the aliens, no matter how powerful they became. No matter how many scissors there were, the stone would always win. During these years, Arya hadn't asked Nick for help even once. The city was self-sufficient. For now. Soon it would need more demons. But not yet. The suffering Nick collected from Aegis was also dropping rapidly. He'd made decent progress toward becoming an initial adversary, but he still needed much more suffering to get there. From time to time, Nick checked the city for dangers. He had advanced quite a bit, and his new knowledge of biology had already increased the efficiency of his mind-reading ability. By now, he could read the minds of mid-heroes. Luckily, the individual danger of a single resident was no longer high. Nurse Alice couldn't sense them, even if they wished for death. These humans also didn't know any sensitive information. Nick also checked on the team of researchers. One person was missing, and had been for a while. There was one less black beam pointing to Nick. Ghosty was gone. Nick was already 320 years old, and Ghosty had died a bit more than 15 years ago. Old age. Near the end, he had been a late hero. Sadly, he just couldn't absorb Zephyx fast enough to become a protector. But that had been clear from the beginning. For the last 200 years of his life, Ghosty had done exactly what he wanted. Research. His whole life, he'd worked on uncovering the secrets of the universe. The technician and Ghosty had been the only ones who knew everything about Nick, and both were gone now. Arya knew a lot, but she still didn't know about Nick's primary ability. Right now, her knowledge of Nick was tied for first place with another being's. The fallen Nick had captured in the ocean, while transporting the fake fiend of darkness. That fallen knew a lot about Nick, but not about his past as a human. Arya knew of his past, but not as much about his abilities as that fallen did. Samar still didn't know Nick was a Specter. She thought he was human. As more time passed, the number of beams leading to Nick decreased. One by one, everyone who knew about him was dying. And that wouldn't end anytime soon. Chapter 876. Nick, we can't wait anymore. We need more demons, Arya transmitted to him. Nick was looking at his collection of fetuses. They'd grown a bit more, but he was still nowhere near done. Another 20 years had passed since he'd last checked on the researchers. By now, there were over 2,000 heroes in the underground city, and the population had reached its maximum capacity. There was no longer any space for more humans, and laws had been put in place prohibiting willful procreation. I'll deal with it in a couple of hours, Nick answered. Thank you, Arya transmitted before cutting the connection. She didn't want to disturb him, knowing his research was the most important thing in the world right now. But the city really needed demons. Nick looked at the city and saw the abundance of heroes. They needed over 500 demons. A crazy number. I should deal with my other job as envious researcher as well. I don't want the sun to grow suspicious. After some hours, Nick got rid of the fetuses and left the underground city. It had been quite a while since he'd looked at the world, and he was sure much had changed. First, he needed to check on Aegis development. Traveling through the Great Triangle, he noticed something quickly. There were many new cities. In the past, Aegis kept the number of cities relatively low. More cities meant more ways for Specters to interfere with them. Nick looked at a couple of cities and read some minds. They found a way to deal with the consumption, he realized. There were many more specialists in every city. The number, compared to a century ago, had almost tripled. They've abandoned the consumption and are using something called a canvas. The method Aegis had created was similar to what the enlightened ones did with their firmament. The canvas was essentially a second Zephyx synchronizer, but flat. It could be used like a Specter core, absorbed during the consumption. Manipulation lines could be put on it, and it gathered more Zephyx. However, its Zephyx generation was only equal to absorbing a mid-elder. But that was already enough. Absorbing a mid-elder was enough to become a shield. The canvas's strongest aspect was its price. Time. Like a shell, the extractor just needed to create it with their own Zephyx. Alternatively, they could use external Zephyx to build it, but that was quite expensive, and most experts didn't have that kind of money. Luckily, it only took 30 years to create with one's own Zephyx. Even so, after becoming a specialist, they needed to hurry. 10 years to build the shell and 30 for the canvas was significant. While the canvas couldn't compare to the Specter cores the underground city made, it was definitely better than the regular consumption. How many people could absorb a mid-elder? Almost nobody. Now everyone had the talent to become a shield, as long as they hurried. Of course, Aegis members got the Zephyx for the canvas for free, saving them 25 of the 30 years. Another thing Nick noticed was the fervent belief everyone had in the Champion of Light. The new right arm almost seemed like a deity to them. His holy, calming aura made them feel safe. And if the right arm was already this divine, how divine was the Champion of Light himself? The image change for the right arm seemed to have worked out very well. After checking a few cities, Nick searched for a group of agents. He found one and snuck up on them, then used a device to clone the barrier of the group's leader. Nick disguised himself, wore the clone barrier, and approached Aegis headquarters. A new database had already been created, and Aegis technology had advanced a lot. There were now weapons using star energy all over the walls of the megastructure. However, with just a glance, Nick could tell the weapons weren't very strong. Seems like the champion is doing my job for me, Nick thought. They're focusing on star energy instead of making pure energy work. And while their manipulation of star energy has progressed, they're not very good at producing it. The star energy generators around the weapons were huge and had little output. One of these generators wouldn't even power a single seed, despite being several meters wide. Nick was reminded of when the Jolly Cannibal told him to forget about star energy and focus on its production before going directly to pure energy. That had been the right call. Star energy was really only useful for two things: fighting specters and making pure energy. Nick decided to stage an argument with the guards about some stupid policy. This would buy him time near the entrance without actually entering. Entering Aegis headquarters would be far too dangerous. Several heroes came and went, and Nick read the minds of the weaker ones. The guards were also on the weaker side, so he could read theirs too. That fast, Nick thought, a bit surprised. Sure enough, with the deaths of famine and the corruptors, Aegis' progress had accelerated massively. The shields were growing stronger thanks to greed, and no longer needed to focus on the corruptors, giving them more freedom to hunt specters. 2 decades ago, Aegis had made a significant step. Nick remembered the artificial forests in the wild that killed any living organism that approached. These had been made by the False Hope, an initial adversary. They were in constant conflict with the countless black blobs created by the Eternal Hunger. Recently, the Eternal Hunger had become an early adversary, putting a lot of pressure on the False Hope. Under that pressure, the False Hope revealed itself, and Aegis took advantage. In a gigantic battle involving death and war as well, Aegis lost 2 shields but managed to suppress both the False Hope and the Eternal Hunger. Right now, Aegis headquarters held 2 initial adversaries, Greed and the False Hope, and 2 early adversaries, the Eternal Hunger and the False Prophet. The shields were growing. Soon the champion would no longer be the only mid-shield. Death and the Trio of Destruction were no longer in an advantageous position. The frequency of their attacks had also lessened significantly, since revealing their locations grew more dangerous by the year. Aegis made a lot of progress. It won't be long before they capture Pestilence in war. Then they'll have Late and Peak shields, and finally they'll capture Death. That's when the first level 9 Extractors will appear. Chapter 877. Aegis was rapidly making progress. I think it'll only take a century for them to capture another 2 adversaries, and a maximum of 2 centuries until they can deal with Death. Maybe 3 or 4 centuries until the first level 9 Extractor appears. While the era won't reset when the first level 9 Extractor arrives, a reset won't be far off. I have to prepare everything by then. After scouting Aegis headquarters, Nick wrapped up his argument with the guards and left. "Oh, son," he said in an isolated location. "Humanity is focusing on making use of star energy. Progress on pure energy is slow, and star energy production is also progressing slowly. Humanity wants to use star energy to fight the Specters. There are many more humans in the world, and many cities now have automatic defenses against weaker Specters. More powerful Extractors are appearing, which I believe is in your interest." Nick wrapped up his report and left. For the foreseeable future, he'd be reachable by the sun, since he'd remain on the surface most of the time. After the report, Nick scouted the wilderness for Specters. He found thousands of hatchlings and a couple of adolescents. However, the number of powerful Specters had dropped considerably. More agents than ever patrolled the wild, and they often caught demons. Luckily, Nick's perception was powerful enough that he could find Specters rapidly. One more thing made it easier for him. Death was no longer near Aegis headquarters. Aegis had become so powerful that staying near their headquarters was dangerous. Instead of pressuring Aegis directly, Death had chosen to hide its location and strike from the shadows. It had destroyed many strongholds over the past decades, but its absence also let more shields travel through the world. In fact, even if Death were near Aegis headquarters, Aegis only needed the Champion of Light. The Champion had been the strongest human for centuries, and he'd worked on his power quite a bit. Together with humanity's increased belief, his power had grown a lot. He could now fight Death as an equal. If the two fought, there was a real possibility the Champion could win and kill Death. Death's absence made it far easier for Nick to capture Specters in the Great Triangle, since he no longer had to fear its perception. Nick captured 5 demons within a single day, but it grew much harder after that. These demons had been easy to find, but there were only so many. After a while, Nick decided to hunt in the Long Continent instead. He quickly found 3 demons and brought them to the underground city. Nick suddenly stopped moving. He was in the underground of the Long Continent. This was a seemingly random location. And yet his ability had just deactivated. Someone was perceiving him. Luckily, Nick could tell where the perception was coming from. It was some distance to the south, and like Nick, whatever was watching him was underground. Has to be a Specter, he thought. This had caught him off guard. He hadn't intended to enter any Specter's perception, and he made sure not to approach any of the dangerous beams. After a while, Nick kept moving, acting like he'd noticed nothing. Luckily, he was always traveling in disguise. Right now, he looked like a pale, gaunt man with red eyes. Nick moved around at random, as if searching for a city to attack. In truth, he was trying to find whatever was perceiving him. None of the beams had moved. Yet Nick had traveled north quite a bit, and he was still being perceived. The source hasn't moved from its spot, he thought. I entered its perception range, and since it hasn't moved, I should have exited that range too. But I didn't. They can sense me, but they aren't moving. That leaves 2 possibilities. 1, their perception range is much bigger, and they're just randomly paying attention to me. 2, their perception range is adjustable. I can't be sure which is true. I need to test something. Nick sped up to his full speed, excluding the boost from his primary ability. He moved just a bit faster than a peak fallen could. A second later, his primary ability reactivated. He was no longer being perceived. Nick stopped right below the closest city and waited. About a second later, his ability deactivated again. That eliminates possibility 1, he thought. If it were an Eternal, my ability wouldn't reactivate just because I moved a bit faster. The fact that it reactivated means I outran their perception. He looked back at the beams. No one has moved. By now, Nick already had an idea who was spying on him. This might be an opportunity. He kept acting like he was scouting the city from below the ground, then simply walked away. This was a fortified city, relatively close to one of the new strongholds. Do you wish to feed? A voice suddenly appeared in Nick's head, and he stopped moving. He looked around but couldn't see anyone. What do you want? Nick asked out loud. I can help you feed, the voice said. You just need to become my servant. Not interested, Nick answered and kept flying. You do not have a choice. No, you do not have a choice, Nick answered. I'm stronger than you think. Even if you're an initial adversary, I'd much rather fight than serve you. Such strength, the voice said with bitterness. But I am also quite strong. The next moment, someone appeared in front of him. It was a starving child with a greedy, bitter expression. One could say the child was envious. Naturally, this was envy. Chapter 878. This was the second time Nick had come face to face with envy in his life. Last time he'd only been a John and helpless. But now Nick was a peak fallen. He was no longer helpless. You must be Envy, Nick said. I've heard about you. Yes, I am Envy, and you are now my servant, Envy said. Nick remained silent for a while. You are quite scary, Nick said. If you were actually here, I might be scared. But you're not. Envy's eyes narrowed. Sure enough, this wasn't Envy's true body. When Envy had appeared, Nick had felt a small fluctuation of Zephyx from a seemingly random spot. After paying close attention, he found the source. Some kind of translucent orb. He could tell immediately that it was the creation of an ability. This was how Envy sensed him, small drones that could see the surroundings, expanding its perception. The drone also projected an image of Envy, making it seem like it was really there. The projection was quite convincing. Nick could even feel its power. Yet it wasn't real, and he knew it. Anyway, I'm leaving before your real body arrives, Nick said. Then he shot north at full speed. Envy didn't say anything. This peak fallen was quite extraordinary, but that was to be expected. There weren't many wild peak fallen left, and the few still out there were formidable and experienced. Nick entered the Great Triangle again. He wanted to seem like he was genuinely escaping, and heading there was the best way to sell it. This was where Aegis was. Eventually, Nick changed course and went to the western part of the Grand Continent. He could hunt there too. One of the trio is relatively close, Nick thought, looking at the beam. Seems to be near the northeastern part of the war continent. Envy is south of the long continent, which means this has to be either death, war, or pestilence. As long as I stay away from this place, it'll be fine. Then Nick returned to hunting demons. This time he got a haul of 10 within a day. That was when his ability deactivated again. Again, he thought, looking southwest. His ability told him Envy was watching him. There were over 10,000 kilometers between them, yet it could still find him. That's quite a terrifying ability. Nick quickly spotted the translucent orb. Bang! He waved his hand and destroyed it. He was essentially telling Envy to fuck off. The next moment, Nick noticed the beam leading to the northeast of the war continent shaking. The owner of that beam was moving. They want me, Nick thought. There aren't many peak fallen left and they desperately need more servants. Nick immediately fled to the closest stronghold and stopped beneath it. He watched the beam shake for a while, then stop. His ability hadn't deactivated during any of it. As expected, they won't come close to a stronghold without being sure no shield is present. Once the beam stopped moving, Nick went further north into the northern sea. He moved around a bit to gauge the angle of the beam. With a little math, he could pin down its owner. Middle of the western Grand Continent, Nick thought. I should change location. Nick went into the ocean east of the Great Triangle and headed south, eventually entering the southern war continent. Envy is still south of the long continent. One of the others is where I was before. One is in the desolate continent. One is near the east of the Grand Continent. Nick started hunting demons in the war continent. Whenever he transported them back to the underground city, he went over 100 kilometers deep underground to avoid being perceived. This time, it only took 12 hours for Envy to find him again, or rather, for Nick to find another orb. He spotted it before it spotted him. They were very good at staying hidden, but he'd gotten used to their fluctuations. Bang! Nick destroyed the orb without revealing himself. The orbs weren't very stable. A bit of Zephyx was enough to disperse them. After destroying it, Nick went back to the long continent. Envy wouldn't expect that, and sure enough, he found no other orb for the next 20 hours. Once again, Nick found the orb first. It was waiting below one of the cities. He went to another city and found another orb. After checking the surrounding cities, he found that all of them had one. It wants to keep me from my food, Nick thought. Naturally, Nick wasn't interested in the cities, but he acted like he was. He waited a couple more days without showing himself. Then he approached one of the orbs. What do you want? Nick transmitted. He wanted to seem as though he'd noticed all the orbs and grown, frustrated, at being unable to feed. As soon as he contacted the orb, the beam to the south started shaking. Envy's true body was on the move. You will be my servant, the orb answered. Bang! Nick destroyed it. But his ability didn't reactivate. More orbs appeared around him. Envy had gathered all its orbs around Nick. He destroyed everyone he saw and fled south. While the peak fallen could sense the orbs, it couldn't know where Envy's real body was. Since the orbs were everywhere, Envy's body could be anywhere. So Nick fled toward it. It didn't take long before he entered Envy's actual perception. Chapter 879. As soon as Nick entered Envy's actual perception, walls of electricity appeared around him. Nick stopped moving. Not surprising, he thought, looking at the walls. Envy probably has hundreds of abilities. But these are reverse-engineered from studying Zephyx synchronizers, not very powerful. There is no escape, Envy transmitted. A second later, its true body appeared in front of him. Okay, I will be your servant, Nick answered from inside the electricity cage. It was only natural for a Specter to capitulate in this scenario. That is the right choice, Envy said. It conjured a green gem in its hands. You will consume this, only then will you be my servant. Nick tried to sense the fluctuations of the gem. Sadly, he wasn't experienced enough to tell what it did from its fluctuations alone. Most likely some kind of bomb it can detonate remotely, he thought. The gem floated through the walls of electricity and landed in his hand. He looked at it for a moment, then at Envy. You walked right into Aegis' trap, Nick said. Before Envy could respond, he transformed into Julian Winter. Envy's eyes narrowed instantly. The electricity cage compressed. Bang! Black smoke exploded out of Nick. Bang! He cut through the cage, and it turned to white dust. Envy could see he was wielding a weapon infused with star energy. Instead of striking, Envy fled. The Specters had always been unsure whether Julian Winter had truly left Aegis. His escape from their headquarters could have been one of his ploys. When Julian said Envy had walked into Aegis' trap, Envy knew he was still part of Aegis. That meant at least one shield was likely close and ready to strike. Envy immediately alerted Death. The next moment, it saw Nick shooting toward the surface. He was escaping. Then it noticed the ice storm and the inferno appearing 40 kilometers to the south, readying their attacks. In response, Envy released a terrifying wave of screeching black souls, distorting perception to keep the two shields from finding it. Then it turned translucent and dove deeper underground. Bang! A blade pierced Envy's chest. Its eyes widened. The inferno and the ice storm were gone. Julian Winter was no longer near the surface, but right in front of it. What was going on? Then Envy realized Julian must have an illusion ability. Bang, bang, bang. 3 more strikes shattered Envy into pieces, all turning to white mist. Its Specter core was revealed. Nick grabbed it and covered it in prefix. The star energy couldn't reach the core. The prefix isolated it. In one fluid motion, he wrapped a Zephyx suppressor around Envy's Specter core and retreated deeper underground. He didn't know how Death would react, but it didn't matter. Some seconds later, Nick examined the suppressed core. That was it. Just to be sure, he inspected it closely. Envy had plenty of tricks, and he wanted to rule out another one. Sure enough, he saw countless small manipulation lines, and he could feel suffering flowing into the core. This was the real deal. I actually got Envy, Nick thought. That was way easier than expected. Yet it had only been easy because of everything he'd learned. The weapon he'd used came from deep core base, one that could injure even Eternals. Even with his ability active, Nick could only wield it very slowly. But its power was devastating. No matter how many abilities Envy had, none of them were powerful enough to resist a strike like that. Envy had also been panicking, since Nick's illusions convinced it a far bigger danger was at hand. In a fair one-on-one fight, Envy would have been formidable. But Nick didn't do fair fights. He was an assassin. He used tricks and subterfuge to disorient enemies before killing them with a single strike. Looking at the Specter core, Nick was reminded of the first time he'd seen Envy. It had caused him a lot of worry back then. Now its life was in his hands. Keeping Envy suppressed would be idiotic, he thought. It has too many abilities. If any of my extractors work with it, it'll probably find a way to manipulate them into letting it escape. Also, it saw part of my true power. But Envy is still worth a lot. This is an initial adversary, and I know someone who'd pay a good price for its death. Nick added more Zephyx suppressors around the core and traveled to the ocean east of the Great Triangle. Whatever Death had done in response to Envy's demise no longer mattered. Several minutes had passed, and whatever battle had been fought was over. Eventually, Nick reached the coast east of Aegis headquarters. Death was nowhere to be seen. He rose slowly from the water and openly faced Aegis headquarters. His ability had already deactivated. Nick held up Envy's Specter core. "Champion, are you willing to make a deal?" he shouted. Aegis headquarters lit up in a bright light, and the champion appeared above it, looking at Nick with a mix of shock and anger. When he saw the Specter core in Nick's hand, he immediately understood why Death had destroyed one of their strongholds minutes ago. The Tinkerer appeared beside the champion, and both looked at Nick. "This is our chance," she transmitted to him. "Julian is on his own, we can kill him." But the champion just looked at Nick. "No," he answered, "you're underestimating his capabilities. If he's willing to show himself this openly, he knows he can escape." Chapter 880. The Tinkerer urged the champion to attack. Julian Winter was dangerous. A trickster. He'd played all of them. They had to deal with him. "I know what I'm doing," the champion transmitted back. The Tinkerer fell silent and accepted his decision. He was the leader of Aegis, and they all had to follow him. "What deal?" the champion asked. "I have Envy's Specter core right here," Nick said. "I know how dangerous it is, and I know you don't want to suppress it. You want it dead. I'm willing to kill it right in front of you. Naturally, I want something in return." The champion looked at him for a while. "What if I don't accept?" "Then I'll let Envy go. It's not a danger to me, but it is to you. I suppressed it on my own. I didn't kill it. I suppressed it. That should tell you enough about my power, Nick transmitted. Except for the null, nothing in this world is better at staying hidden than me. Humanity doesn't have that luxury. By now, 2 more shields had appeared. What do you want? The champion asked after a while. 500 suppressed demons, Nick said. Dump them in the middle of the ocean. Once you have, I'll kill envy right in front of your eyes. The shields looked surprised. 500 demons. Why would Julian want so many? Why do you want so many? What use do you have for them? The champion asked. You know how specters grow, Nick transmitted. You also know how I grow. I'm the purest specter because I grow from suffering. The Crimson Sea grows stronger by consuming specters. I might not be able to grow stronger that way, but I can kill them. I'll take 500 specters that produce a lot of Zephyx and scatter their Zephyx across the world. Millions of hatchlings will be born and cause suffering everywhere. If I asked for 10 protectors, you wouldn't accept that trade, but I think you're fine with 500 demons. The champion narrowed his eyes. He could tell Julian was speaking the truth. Creating so many new specters would cause quite a bit of suffering. There was a good reason humans rarely killed specters. Julian would not feed on a couple of cities, or on Aegis alone. No, he would feed on all of humanity. And as hard as it was to admit, the champion knew Julian was right. 500 demons in exchange for envy's death would be worth it. He conferred with the other shields for a while. We accept, but we'll only hand over the specters after you've killed envy, the champion said. That doesn't work anymore, Nick transmitted. You betrayed me. You tried to kill me. You broke our agreement. I haven't. I'm the trustworthy one here. I've never broken our agreement, and the day I do will be the last day I can work with Aegis. If I break my word now, how will I become an early adversary in the future? How will I become a mid-adversary? You do this trade on my terms, or there's no trade. Only the champion heard these words. He remained silent for several seconds. Fine, we'll bring your demons, he said. Good, Nick said. Then are you willing to consider another trade? Another trade, the champion asked, furrowing his brows. Another 500 demons, but this time I'll give you an adversary that's easy to work with, Nick transmitted. We need more details, the champion said. Just ready the demons, Nick said. We'll do one trade at a time. You put 500 demons in the ocean. I kill envy. Then we can talk about the second trade. Keep the demons prepared for it. I'll be back in a week. That should be enough time. Then Nick shot into the water and vanished. The champion stared at the spot where he'd been. Prepare 1,000 demons, he ordered. The politician furrowed his brows. That won't be easy. If he didn't lie, this will be worth it, the champion said. Our heroes might grow slower, but we get a dead adversary and a living one in return. Also, if Julian breaks his word, we owe him nothing. Just prepare the demons. As you command, the politician said. Over the next week, Aegis gathered demons from all over the world in exchange for waiving several years of tributes. A week later, a mountain of containment units sat prepared in front of Aegis headquarters. Nick reappeared on time. The champion looked at the protectors, and heroes gathered below him. Dump them in the ocean, he commanded. They did. A deal's a deal, Nick said. I don't think you cheated me, so I'll only check the contents after I've killed envy. Then he crushed the Specter core in his hands. A humongous amount of Zephyx scattered across the world instantly. Proof that he'd just killed an adversary. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so much Zephyx. Now I'll check the contents of the containment units. Our second deal can happen after that, Nick said. He just waited. Nick went to the containment units and broke them open easily. He killed one demon after another. In the end, he killed 300 and suppressed the remaining 200. He just couldn't see what he was doing, since the salt trident kept him hidden. Nick rapidly transported the surviving demons to a secure location, making sure no markers or trackers were on them. You kept your word, he said, reappearing. Now for the second deal. I'm willing to hand you a mid-adversary that's easy to work with for the other 500 demons. He pulled a containment unit out of the ground. The Tinkerer stared at it in shock. How had Julian gotten his hands on such a strong containment unit? The champion and Nick ironed out the details. Eventually, Aegis dumped the other 500 containment units into the ocean. In response, Nick threw his containment unit onto dry land. Happy doing business with you. he transmitted before rapidly dealing with the containment units in the ocean. Aegis went over to the unit and tried to open it. It had no employee entrance. They had to open the main door. After 5 minutes it opened. The champion readied himself to suppress the Specter inside. But when the door opened, there was nothing there. For a moment, he believed Julian had cheated them. Then he saw a piece of paper in the middle of the unit. The Salt Trident is willing to capitulate. As long as it stays alive and gets food, it will work with you. It won't attack any humans anymore. You can go to it and suppress it directly. The champion's eyes widened. Then he clenched his teeth in anger. Technically, Julian had kept his word. But he hadn't put in any real effort. He'd simply forwarded a message. In exchange for 500 demons. On this day, Nick's Specter name was born. Referring to him by a human name no longer seemed fitting. He was a fully fledged Specter now, and his existence was added to Aegis' new database. No longer a confidential existence. His title, The Trickster, Chapter 881. The Trickster. This was Nick's official Specter name. He had played the Corruptors several times, using tricks and false intelligence to get them killed. Then, according to Aegis, he had manipulated the technician and controlled his mind. After that, he tricked Aegis and escaped their headquarters. No Specter had ever managed that before. Lastly, he traded a simple note for hundreds of demons without breaking the agreement. It was a fitting name. You could make a deal with the trickster, but catching it was almost impossible. It just knew too many tricks. Luckily, the trickster didn't seem to attack humans. For now, things might change in the future. Nick had received 1,000 demons from the deal, a brutally high number. Aegis had considered betraying him during the trade, but decided against it. The trickster seemed to keep its word, and it still helped humanity through its deals. Just as promised, Envy had been killed, and they received a mid-adversary that was easy to work with. Just as Nick had said, the Salt Trident didn't attack the humans when they entered the ocean. It had been willing to capitulate earlier, but had no way to contact them. Its domain was the water, and any servant would be safe from it the moment they left the water. The Salt Trident wouldn't entrust its future to a servant it couldn't trust. But when Nick reappeared, it saw its chance. He kept his word in the past, and didn't seem overly antagonistic to any side. Naturally, Nick gladly accepted the offer and didn't even ask for much in return. He just wanted the Salt Trident's protection for the deal. Eventually, the shields carefully entered the ocean, and sure enough, it didn't attack them. They made their way to it, in the middle of the biggest ocean. As soon as they arrived, its body dissolved on its own, revealing its Specter core. He just took hold of the core and brought it to their headquarters. They'd already prepared a containment unit filled with water. The Salt Trident grew more powerful by absorbing all the water in a human's body. A human would lose their mind and swim to it, then feed from its body until they died. Death was a side effect, not a necessity. Extractors could simply feed from it, suffer strong dehydration, and leave again. Sure enough, it was easy to work with. Even better, it was a mid-adversary, meaning Aegis now had the capability to create late shields. A huge milestone. After all, the champion was a mid-shield. He could finally grow stronger. This deal had been worth it. Meanwhile, on the other side of the deal, after receiving the 1,000 demons, Nick killed 600 of them. It was difficult to track how much Zephyx dispersed across the world, but as long as a lot did, everyone would believe Nick had kept his word and killed all the demons. The 600 dead demons would birth countless hatchlings and possession specters, various levels all over the world. Meanwhile, the 400 survivors were integrated into the underground city. Arya had wanted 100. Nick gave her over 400, including the ones he'd already captured. By now, the underground city had over 600 demons. Enough to constantly employ over 2,000 heroes. Not enough for the tens of thousands of heroes they expected eventually, but good enough for now. Given how much Zephyx every hero could absorb daily, everyone would still gain enough to theoretically become protectors. After dealing with the demons, Nick returned to his laboratory. Creating a new kind of human had the highest priority now. He continued researching. After another 20 years, Nick had made some progress. Some fetuses survived for quite a long while, but the survival rate was a measly 3%. Survival in this context meant getting past the very early stage, All of them died later or simply stopped growing. The more I experiment, the more impossible everything seems, Nick thought, looking at the countless tubes of fetuses in front of him. I can make fetuses immune to the darkness. I can make fetuses that work with pure energy. But I can't make fetuses with both. They need an artificial attunement with the nightmare to survive in the darkness. But for that, they need a Zephyx synchronizer or a similar organ. And if I create a similar organ, I'd just be copying the enlightened ones. The aliens are prepared for that. I need to create a human without a natural Zephyx storage, but that makes attuning them to the nightmare impossible. It seems to be an unsolvable problem. These two things just aren't compatible. Sure, I could plan an artificial implant later, but that can't be the solution. The more implants and technology in someone, the more weaknesses there are. It needs to be a closed system. How can I solve this? Nick kept thinking for a while. Why do they need to be immune to the darkness? Because the nightmare will kill them otherwise. The darkness isn't the issue, the nightmare is. Specters are immune to the nightmare, but specters aren't human. Nick kept searching for a solution. Then he got an idea. Not what I'd envisioned, but it seems possible. He furrowed his brows. But this is tough. It would change humans too much. He tried to think of another solution, but this seemed to be the only feasible one. I should try it. If it doesn't work, I can still search for another. Chapter 882. Nick entered the nightmare's domain through the fiend of darkness. He hadn't been there in a long while. Seeing the nightmare again reminded him of the Pure One and the other knowledge repositories. Looking closer at its features, he could see the bones and atrophied muscles resembled the old emperor he'd seen before. Nick was 99% sure this was the old emperor of the empire. He'd raised the Pure One like a child, and he was the reason humanity even had a slight chance to free itself from the aliens. Humanity would need millennia to reach the empire's technological level. But humanity didn't have millennia. The era would most likely reset within less than 1,000 years. Without the enlightened ones, humanity wouldn't have even the tiniest chance. Nick looked at the old emperor with respect. He had given his life for humanity. I don't know you, Nick thought, but I believe you wouldn't agree with my plan. You wanted to free humanity. What I'm going to free is not humanity. Not anymore. But what can be created can be destroyed. During a war for survival, sympathy and love are only hindrances. Only apathy and decisiveness will help win the war. When the war is over, we can slowly work on regaining the empathy we've lost. But for now, we have no use for it. I'm sorry, but I have to do this. I can't find another way. Nick took out a couple of small machines and placed them around the nightmare. He activated them, recording all the biological information of the Emperor's body. Some minutes later, he put the machines away and threw one last glance at the Emperor. I have to do this. Earth needs to be free. Then he left and returned to his lab. There, he examined the genetic makeup of the Emperor. Over the next 10 years, he grew cells sharing the Emperor's DNA. That was the easy part. Now came the hard part, integrating the necessary parts of that DNA into a normal human genome. Nick had to slowly isolate one part of the Emperor's DNA at a time and combine it with newly grown human cells. People and Specters generally didn't suffer from their own abilities. If the nightmare were intelligent, it would realize these cells weren't part of its own being. But it wasn't. The nightmare was a machine. Nick just needed to fool its sensors into believing it was interacting with itself, or with a Specter. The second option was impossible. Specters were made of Zephyx, while the new humans would be filled with pure energy. So he had to fool the sensors the other way. It was draining work. Experiment after experiment. Trial after trial. After 10 years, Nick narrowed the necessary portion of the Emperor's DNA down to 10%. As long as fetuses included that 10%, they'd be immune to the nightmare. But it was worth remembering, Nick hadn't taken DNA from the old Emperor himself, but from the nightmare. An important difference. 10% of the Emperor's DNA was already too much. The cells showed a weakness to star energy. As the human grew stronger, the star energy coursing through their body would destabilize the DNA. The stronger they became, the more they'd mutate. Unacceptable. A life of misery. So Nick kept going. After another 10 years, he narrowed it to 7%. Better. The chance of future mutation dropped to just 30%. Still too much. He kept working. 10 years later, he pushed it to 6%. He was approaching the limits of what was possible. The mutation risk fell to merely 3%. Nick wanted to finalize the process there. 3% was acceptable. No, it has to be lower. He kept working. It took him 30 years to reduce it to 5%. Looking at his newest batch of fetuses, he could hardly believe it. I've done it. I've actually pushed the mutation risk to almost zero. However, he thought, narrowing his eyes, there will still be changes. They'll look human and share almost identical desires. But there will be some fundamental differences. Nick was reminded of the city that produced huge numbers of babies, using them as shields, bait, even food. The people there had been without any empathy. It might not be as extreme as that city, but it won't be far off. Nick sighed, looking at the fetuses. Now I just need to make them stable. The hardest part is done. The genome is basically complete. I just need to tweak a few things and create a method of easy distribution. That last part took only 5 years. And that should be it, Nick thought, looking at the empty fetus containers. The theory is solid. I've seen it succeed many times already. Now we need actual trials. Nick left his lab and went to Summer. I've succeeded, he said. Summer's eyes widened. You did it, she asked in shock. Nick nodded. I've created a stable human genome immune to the nightmare that works with pure energy. Summer grew excited, which was rare for her. However, there will be some unwanted side effects, Nick said. Summer calmed, furrowing her brows, and waited for him to continue. Nick explained in detail how it worked. Summer was a brilliant scientist, but Nick operated on a level that made it hard for her to follow. It hurt her pride, but she had to ask him to simplify things. When he finished, she looked at the table with a worried, bitter expression. I don't like it, she said. Normal humans will still survive, Nick said. When star energy washes over the planet, only extractors will die. We'll still have normal humans left. Yes, but, Summer said, what will these new humans do to the old ones? I'll make sure they do nothing, Nick said. We're breeding warriors. We need warriors for the war. If they can integrate into a peaceful society afterward, they can stay. If they can't, then we don't need them anymore. Chapter 883. I'm pregnant, the woman asked in shock. It appears so, the doctor said. Do you have a childbearing license? The woman went pale with fear. She'd always wanted a child of her own, but the city was at maximum capacity. She wouldn't get a license for decades. No, she answered weakly. The doctor set a pill on the table. Then take this. The fertilized egg will be terminated within minutes. You won't feel a thing. The woman stared at the pill in terror. Taking it felt like killing a child. Raising the child in secret wasn't possible either. There was surveillance everywhere, and children needed to attune to the darkness eventually regardless. People had tried to give birth in secret before. It never worked. The government knew everything. I don't want to kill my child, she said. You could ask another mother to give you her childbearing license, the doctor said. But then she'd have to kill hers, right? The doctor nodded. The woman stared at the pill, terrified. It was just a fertilized egg. Not a big deal. Yet she couldn't bring herself to swallow it. Eventually she broke down in tears. The doctor sighed. There is one other option, but you might not like it, he said. She looked at him hopefully. There's a government program underway, he said. It concerns the future of humanity. The details are highly confidential. I don't even know exactly what it involves. But if you agree to take part, you may keep your child. Yes, of course, she shouted immediately. I can't kill my own child. The doctor sighed and sent a form to her seed. As a hero, she read through it instantly. Taking a deep breath, she signed and sent it back. The doctor read it and raised his brows in surprise. You accepted? She nodded decisively. He sighed again. I've offered this to 7 or 8 people already. All of them refused. My child is my child, she said. It doesn't matter who they become. They'll always be mine. The doctor nodded. I'll forward this. Someone will contact you within a couple of days. Thank you, she said brightly. She could keep her child. And she was allowed to raise it in the darkness. She didn't need to send it to the light area for 10 years. She went home and shared the news with her husband. He was less than pleased when he heard the details. "How would that still be my child?" he asked coldly. "They'll still be our child, just different," she answered. A huge argument followed. In the end, he faced an ultimatum: become a father or leave. Begrudgingly, he chose fatherhood. Maybe it wouldn't be as bad as the paper said. 2 days later, the woman was called to the government headquarters. She met 9 other women there for the same reason. They bonded quickly, and a few minutes later 2 people entered. One was an unknown doctor, the other. Everyone took a deep breath. They recognized her. The Chancellor. They'd seen images of her, but never met her in person. Samar gave a long speech about the future of humanity. Afterward, each of the 10 women received a bottle of pills. 1 pill every 2 hours for 3 consecutive days. Luckily, heroes didn't need sleep, which made it manageable. The woman followed the instructions. She felt considerable pain in the initial phase, but as a hero, she'd endured worse. The only thing that truly worried her was her child's health. She just hoped it wouldn't suffer. Eventually, the pain stopped, and the pregnancy proceeded normally. About 9 months later, she went into labor. As a hero, she normally wouldn't need a hospital. There was no danger to fetus or mother. But for this birth, she had to go. The doctor and the Chancellor watched personally. The birth went smoothly, and the mother finally saw her child for the first time. The child didn't cry. It just looked around curiously. Seeing it for the first time, something shook inside her. The child already had raven black hair. Its eyes were vibrant red, its skin ashen. It didn't look like other humans, and she knew it wouldn't be like them. But this was her child, and she loved it. Him more precisely. A boy. She hugged her newborn son with love. He seemed uninterested in her, just looking at his surroundings. But she didn't care. This was her son. Meanwhile, Samar studied the child. Emotional apathy, the doctor beside her said. Naturally, this was Nick in disguise. They're only interested in themselves and the collective. They have a small capacity to feel love, but it will feel very dulled. The children will be born highly intelligent and talented. The anterior insular cortex is significantly smaller. The anterior cingulate cortex and somatosensory cortex are just as small. Luckily, the inferior frontal gyrus is enhanced. While they may struggle to feel empathy or understand other emotions, their heightened capacity for abstract thought could let them act in accordance with what humans consider right or wrong. But the child will need to train and focus on that if they ever want a life among people unlike them. By an antiquated term, you could call them intelligent psychopaths. Nick sighed. If I could, I would have done it differently. Chapter 884. You can't do that, the mother shouted at her 12-year-old boy. Why not? The boy asked, raising a brow, arms crossed. He insulted you. Yes, that's bad, but you can't elbow someone's throat because they insulted someone you love, she shouted. You could have killed him. The boy snorted. I defended your honor, and this is how you thank me. I did this for you. Anna, don't play your tricks on me, she said. We both know that's not the reason. Then what reason do you want to hear? The truth, she said. He grimaced with a bit of disgust. He really didn't want to tell the truth. He knew he'd be punished. She sighed. I know things can be difficult for you. Just tell me the truth. He looked away. Thinking of the boy he'd almost killed, he couldn't keep a smirk off his face. I've been a bit stressed with school lately, he said. I needed an outlet. Not the entire truth, but close enough that his mother believed him. Anna, you can't use violence to relieve boredom or stress. Yes, I know, he answered with annoyance. He genuinely didn't understand his mother's issue. That guy had insulted his mother. His caretaker. His parents were highly regarded, and the other boy had attacked that status. He was not the son of some bastards. As the son of 2 highly regarded parents, he deserved respect. Someone with such an opinion of him and his parents had no worth. So what if he died? He wouldn't have contributed to society anyway. As his mother kept reprimanding him, he just turned away. He remembered how exciting it had been, hitting that boy's throat. Watching him gasp for air in terror had been hilarious. So pathetic and weak. He wasn't sure he'd ever seen anything funnier. Like some fly with its wings pulled off, stumbling across the floor, a dumb, wingless insect. He'd felt quite the thrill, watching someone else suffer under his power. So funny. Yes, I won't do it again. I promise, okay, he said after a long tongue lashing. His mother studied him for a while. As long as it doesn't happen again. It won't. I love you, she said, hugging her boy. I love you too, he said, returning the hug. But he only went through the motions, letting go quickly. Hearing him say he loved her, she felt a deep pain in her heart. A reminder. She knew her boy didn't love her. He couldn't. She could also tell he hadn't been completely truthful, but she acted like she believed him. She just didn't want to hear the real reason. Her boy was terrifyingly intelligent, and he'd realized early that half-truths were the best way to get what he wanted. He lied without a trace of guilt, which made him a very good liar. Is father's pay in yet? Anna asked. She sighed, yes. Great, he said with a smile. At least he's good for something. Anna, she shouted, I've told you several times not to talk about your father like that. He scoffed. Who cares? He doesn't love me anyway. You're the one who loves me, not him. His job isn't to be a father. His job is to be a provider. You love me, right? He asked, looking at her with scared eyes. Her heart ached at his pained, frightened expression. She knew it was just a trick. She knew he didn't care. And yet, yes, I love you, she said, voice shaking. He smiled and hugged her tightly. As long as we're together, we can get through things. We're a team. Father brings money, but we both know he doesn't bring us love. And love is all that matters, right? She took a deep breath. Anthony loves both of us, she said, then narrowed her eyes. And I've told you already, stop trying to isolate your father from this family. I'm not, Anna shouted. You are. I've watched you grow up. I know your tricks. No, I genuinely don't want that, he shouted. Think about it. If I isolated father from the family, we'd lose half our income. That's not in my interest. She narrowed her eyes. Her son was terrifyingly persuasive for his age. But she wasn't fooled. He used arguments that mocked the truth, making it seem foolish to believe otherwise. But Anna knew it wasn't foolish at all. Yes, he wanted to isolate his father from the family. Sure, they might lose half the money, but he couldn't stand that asshole. So what if they lost the money? The emotional payoff of watching that asshole get betrayed by the one person he loved would be worth it. Mother and son argued a while longer, but he smoothed things over once he realized he wasn't getting anywhere. Eventually, he left to play with his friends. Nick watched all of this in secret. Everything's going as predicted, he thought. He's young and his brain hasn't fully developed. He might not want to act like a decent human now, but he'll realize he has to eventually. His intentions will be entirely self-serving, but his actions will benefit humanity. Nick took a deep breath. Because of their ashen skin and inherent immunity to the nightmare, he decided to call this new kind of human nightmen. Nightmen were fiercely intelligent, but didn't care much about others. They knew they had to help the greater collective, since they'd suffer if it suffered. But that was the extent of it. They just wanted a good life. In that regard, nightmen were just like normal humans. Their idea of a good life was simply different. Chapter 885. The Nightmen. This was what Nick had envisioned for humanity. It was not the best solution. Creating an entire race of inherent psychopaths was not what he considered humanity. Humanity was supposed to be filled with emotions. Parents loving their children. Children loving their parents. Partners loving each other. Yet with the Nightmen, this would not happen. They couldn't feel empathy, and love would be very difficult for them to feel. Even amongst each other, they wouldn't feel much. If Nick had a choice, he wouldn't have chosen this. The Emperor's DNA was the DNA of a Specter, and Specters were very different from humans. Technically, Specters didn't even have DNA. However, the Emperor had once been human, so he'd had DNA. And now he was also a Specter. This created a unique scenario that let Nick cross a Specter with a human. To make the Nightmen immune to the darkness, Nick had to include some parts of the Emperor's DNA. Sadly, no matter what he chose to include, the new humans would carry some Specter characteristics. Around 70% of that DNA related to Zephyx and its various applications. Nick couldn't use any of that, since the Nightmen needed to work with pure energy. About 20% was a mix of Zephyx and other Specter characteristics. Naturally, the part with Zephyx still couldn't be included. The Specter characteristics also couldn't be incorporated. For example, wanting to cause suffering. Antisocial people might enjoy inflicting suffering, but that came from other emotions. They did it to feel empowered, or to disperse the grayness that comes from lacking empathy or love as a motivator. Most humans willingly endured hardship, like a grueling job, to improve the lives of their loved ones. As long as I keep earning, my wife and children can have a happy life. Many people thought this way. The love and compassion they felt for their loved ones was satisfying. They had a purpose in life. They were doing the right thing. The spectrum for antisocial people was wide, and some of them could feel love and empathy too. But for those who couldn't, that inherent satisfaction didn't exist, so they had to find it elsewhere. Status, power, wealth. When someone has eaten only tasteless, bland food their whole life, an average loaf of bread might taste like the most delicious thing they've ever had. Many antisocial people never tasted the fulfillment of loving someone and supporting them. Someone who loved another person with their whole being would do anything for them. A promotion was nice, but without an improvement in the relationship, it might feel hollow. After all, they worked for their family. What was the point of the promotion if it only strained the relationship? Many antisocial people never had that, which was why climbing in status was the most exhilarating feeling they'd ever known. It felt like true purpose. Because of that, they threw everything into their careers. Many worked harder than almost anyone. For them, work wasn't a tool towards some other goal. Work was the goal. It was fulfilling. Naturally, this wasn't true for everyone. Plenty of antisocial people didn't care about work either. But the nightmen Nick had created weren't built that way. Specters desired power, and this was one aspect he'd incorporated into them. The nightmen desired power and excitement. Conflict was exciting. It brought color into the grayness. It was different. The nightmen were fiercely competitive. They schemed against each other to get what they wanted. Status, wealth, power. This obviously sounded dangerous and self-destructive for a society. That was where the other aspect came in. Very high intelligence. An ordinary antisocial person might consume everything just to have everything. But a truly intelligent one understood that without society, they'd have nothing. Society needed to keep existing. And it needed to thrive. What was better, commanding 5 Johns or 10 veterans? You need veterans in the first place if you want to command them. The nightmen would compete fiercely with each other. 2 heroes might go at each other's throats for a bigger pile of resources. But they wouldn't go after the experts or veterans. They needed those, the seeds of the trees that would feed them fruit later. Explaining antisocial behavior in full would take too long, and much of this was overgeneralized. But it fit the nightmen well enough. Would the nightmen sacrifice themselves for humanity? Of course not. But if forced to, it wouldn't matter. Staying calm in a fight was the most important trait, and many antisocial people could stay eerily calm under pressure. Dangerous to their allies, but even more dangerous to the enemy. As long as they were kept in line, it would be a net positive. The nightmen were warriors. When the final battle came, they would strike with hunger, greed, and vengeance. If they could integrate into society with normal humans once the fight was over, they could stay. But if they couldn't, at that point, humans wouldn't need to be immune to the darkness anymore. All those Specter traits would no longer be necessary. Nick could simply make normal people who worked with pure energy, with no Specter traits at all. Most likely, the nightmen would find a place in the new society. They were intelligent, and they knew what would happen if they didn't. Nick was holding their leash. And if they misbehaved once the fight was over, he would put them down. Chapter 886. Nick took a deep breath. He'd been doing that a lot these past few years. For the last 15 years, he'd overseen the development of the first batch of nightmen. Just as expected, they quickly showed tendencies toward manipulation and volatility. But the volatility wasn't emotional. It was their tendency to jump quickly into physical confrontation. They weren't overcome with anger, nor did they lose control. They simply believed the emotional payoff of punching someone who'd annoyed them was worth whatever punishment followed. Normal people might regret their actions and wish they hadn't done them. The nightmen didn't work that way. Punching that guy just felt amazing. So what if they lost some resources for a while? They'd made their choice, and now they'd live with it. These tendencies will change as they grow older and more experienced, Nick thought. Right now it seems like a good trade-off, but once they're adults and punishments grow heavier, they'll hold back. Not because they don't want to, but because they don't want to suffer the consequences. They'll only act when they're sure they can get away with it. Anner's death should be a good lesson for the others. Anner, one of the nightmen, had tried to kill someone a couple of months ago. He'd believed he could get away with it by making the death look like a Specter attack. Sadly for him, the underground city was under constant surveillance, and Nick paid special attention to all of them. Nick had informed Arya in advance, and a guard intervened just before Anner killed the other boy. Killing was forbidden, and Nick told Samar to hold a public execution. The other nightmen and their parents had to attend. The parents were furious. Their children were still teenagers, but the teenagers themselves didn't care. All they felt was disdain. This idiot got caught. Did he really think outsmarting the city would be that easy? Serves him right. That was the general consensus among the other young nightmen. Almost all of them had stepped out of line at some point, but Anner was the first to go this far. I need powerful, shrewd people, Nick thought. If you're intelligent enough to get past the surveillance, nothing happens to you. Though that would be difficult even for me. Cameras are everywhere. The only feasible way would be to disguise myself as someone else and vanish shortly after. I can vanish. They can't. Even in disguise, the cameras catch them putting it on or taking it off. Since getting past the surveillance is nearly impossible, they're forced to compete for power within the law. Either be shrewd enough to outsmart this overbearing system, or follow the rules. Those are the only two options. The attempted murder was big news. The first time anyone had tried to kill anyone else in the underground city's history. Introducing the Nightmen had clearly made the city worse. But it was necessary. This was for humanity. I don't think this will conclude in this era, Nick thought. We need the Nightmen to reach level 9 Extractor. They feed on pure energy, but pure energy also needs Zephyx. The huge Zephyx storage helps, but it's not enough to create several level 9 Extractors. We need far more Zephyx. We need normal shields who can work with adversaries to produce a ton of it. Preferably, we need normal level 9 Extractors too. Theoretically, we could create shields and even initial level 9 Extractors thanks to the Ice Maiden, but that takes too long and is too risky. I don't want anyone with the power to break the underground city shell. All of this is just a test run. I'm testing the Nightmen, seeing how they develop. I need to know what to watch for in the future. This era is already fairly close to its end. Trying to free humanity now would be unrealistic and would waste humanity's biggest chance. It has to happen next era. While humanity develops normally on the surface, the underground city will grow exponentially. While the surface humans are just starting to suppress Fallen, the underground city will already have dozens of isolated shields. Nick furrowed his brows. But I don't know when to stop. The aliens found the enlightened ones before they could strike. Before we get any level 9 Extractors, I need to learn how much we can grow before we're noticed. For that, I need to visit the alien base and study their technology. And before I can do that, I need to become an adversary. I think it's about time to visit the last knowledge repository. While the Nightmen develop, I can work on my personal power. If I can't infiltrate the alien base, none of this matters anyway. Nick contacted Samar and Arya and told them he'd be leaving for a couple of years. He also told them to create more Nightmen and observe their development. The more Nightmen they had, the more Nick would learn about them, and the smoother the future would go. Arya and Samar weren't fans of introducing more Nightmen into the city, but they knew it was necessary. This was all for humanity's future. They needed the Nightmen, and they needed to learn how to work with them. Humanity needed both normal people and the Nightmen to succeed. Finding that balance would take a long time. A lot of trial and error. Nick left it all to Samar and moments later left the underground city. It was time to visit the last knowledge repository. The one concerning energy manipulation.